And hello for the inaugural episode of Through the Years, which is an idea Matt came up with, and I'm very happy that he asked me to do this, where we're going to kind of do something. I don't think that anyone else has done this yet. I was looking. If someone has, feel free to contact us. I'll give out some contact info later. But I don't think anyone's done a chronological Ring of Honor review show where people review show by show, episode by episode. They've done it with a lot of other companies, but I don't think they've ever done it with this. And I think we're both pretty big fans of the company's older days. And I also think when we did the List 'em and Learn episode, for those who haven't checked that out, that's Matt's great podcast where he counts down, well, he lists things and then sometimes we learn. But we did one about the top 10 wrestlers in Ring of Honor history. And I think one thing I realized going back and doing that is I think this is 15 years is kind of the perfect time to take a look back, I think. What do you think?
Well,
Matt?
first of all, yes, Hobbs, we have not introduced ourselves yet, but that was everybody's favorite, Hobbs, and I am Matt Feuerstein. And by the way, Through the Years, spelled ThROH for those searching for it on Google. Well, I know that was your concern with the name, but I think we'll get through it. I think there are a lot of podcasts out there, or at least some, that are chronological review shows. My favorite being Where the Big Boys Play, where Chad and Parv review the WCW big events going back all the way to the early Starcades, and between that and the Honor Roll Top 50 Wrestlers Project and the ROH 15th anniversary and all the news now with whatever's going on with ROH and WWE, I thought it was like you said, a good time to go back and just look. First of all, it's fun for me to go back and watch all those old shows, but just to go show by show and kind of see where ROH has been, possibly where it's going. I have no idea how long we're going to keep this up for, but I'd like to go for at least a pretty long time. There's a lot of years of great stuff that I just remember to get through. And then there are a bunch of shows along the way, especially in the first couple of years, that I've only maybe watched once. So I'm very much looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. Even a lot of my favorite kind of shows have gotten to the point where it's been a few years, even the ones I really used to watch a lot. So I'm actually really interested in trying to kind of see how my tastes line up now compared to then. Because, again, with the 15 years, I think we're just at that point where enough time has passed where there might be some things that worked then that didn't work now. I think that'll be real interesting to see. And, yeah, I mean, even if we got halfway through, there's so much to cover before we conk out on this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Even if we got like a third of the way through, we'd still be going through a lot of pretty memorable stuff. So like I said, I'm looking forward to it. But I guess before we actually get started, because today's episode we're going to be reviewing the very first Ring of Honor show, right? Era of Honor Begins, and boy, things were different. But I think before we get to that, we should probably contextualize Ring of Honor as far as what it was at the time, what it is now, what it is to us, and all that jazz.
Okay, yeah. We talked about a little bit about this on the List 'em and Learn, but I think it's worth repeating even for those that did hear. But I think for me personally, Ring of Honor was kind of the thing that kept me in wrestling in the early to mid 2000s, right when I was starting to right at a time when I felt like WWE was getting stale and I was kind of breaking away. It was my entry into independent wrestling. It was my entry into like buying tapes from a promotion month after month rather than just I'm going to buy this random 8-hour block of Japanese wrestling and nurse it for a couple months. It was, no, every 2 or 3 months I'm going to make my order. I'm looking forward to it. I want every show, that comes out. And now as someone who sees a lot of other U.S. indie wrestling, I kind of, Ring of Honor went in a direction that, I don't think Ring of Honor is horrible now, but it's certainly not what it was when I was first drawn to it. And also, quite frankly, Ring of Honor has influenced so many companies. There's just more options now if you want that kind of product than I think when we first discovered it.
Yeah, I think ROH today puts out good events, for sure. The well-produced events. I think the booking is often at least pretty good, but it's not on the cutting edge anymore. I think, well, we could agree with that, but
Yeah.
at its peak, I'd say it was pretty close to what the cutting edge was in American wrestling, as far as the style it presented, the way it presented it. I think for me, similarly, it was my entry into independent wrestling. I still haven't gotten as into independent wrestling, I think, as you have. I don't know, it just seems overwhelming to me to like follow all the promotions and all that stuff. There are a few that I follow. I'm always at least looking at what happens at PWG, even if I don't see the shows, and Evolve, and I still haven't really gotten into like the real like indie scene where you're watching the real up and comers and like the kind of the local scene. But ROH, like it was. In the early to mid 2000s, there's a lot that I enjoyed about WWE, honestly, but there was also a lot of really frustrating stuff that was going on there,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea that there was no WCW, there was no ECW, TNA for most of its run, save for maybe about like a year and a half or 2 years, was always disappointing or just flat out bad. So the idea that there was this company out there that was getting all this praise, and it sort of had this cool, like, exclusive vibe, at least by the standards that I was used to, was very appealing to me. And then when I first went to ROH in 2005, I'd seen, I'd definitely, seen some of the matches, I guess downloaded in extra legal means.
Extra.
As I started going in 2005, and then it sold me immediately, and then I just bought all the back DVDs. Like I got everything going back to 2002, and then I bought every DVD going forward for a couple of years there, and go to every ROH show that I could that was in driving distance, whether that was in Manhattan or Long Island or Philly or Connecticut or Jersey. It's amazing to think back now about how much money I spent on ROH, so I don't feel guilty about downloading those matches previously. But it not only kept me involved in wrestling, but it was like a huge, like it was a major, like almost like social central point in my life for a couple of years there. Like in a couple of years right after I graduated college, and I was a little bit aimless. I don't know if it made me more aimless or not, but it certainly was, something that I spent a lot of time either watching or attending. Probably kept me from falling too deeply, at least into like a post-college depression. And then I think probably once the Benoit incidents happened in '07, I slowly like faded out, and that was also around the time where I think the electricity around the company was kind of fading away. So it was just, and then I would just go more and more sporadically. And, but like these early shows, I remember, I said, I saw the main event of the first show before I got into ROH, like about maybe a couple years before I got into it. This brings me back to not 2002, but more 2005, when I was like discovering this, like, it was great actually to get into it a couple of years late, because it was like, oh my God, all this stuff to watch. I don't know if you were into it right at the beginning or not, but just like the idea that you had this treasure trove of all this stuff with all these like guys that you're just really starting to get into, and there's like 2 years or 3 years worth of material that you could just go back and like plow through. That was amazing.
I kind of got in. I was in somewhat in 2003, but I really got in kind of strangely enough around the Feinstein scandal, where it was kind of almost like with the TNA, where they kind of pulled the talent. I kind of used that as strangely enough, a jumping on point when probably a few people were considering making that a jumping off point. Not for any weird pervy reason, just it was a coincidence. But I remember I was in this weird position at the time of I was trying to keep up with the 2004 on as it happened. And at the same time, when I had extra money, I was trying to start to build my collection from 2002 at the start. And it was weird even then, you could see the difference. And it was kind of weird to be like, I'm getting these new shows, and then I'm getting from a different dealer that's going to be cheaper than the official dealer these really bad fourth-generation copy VHSs of the first shows. But going back to when you said you were kind of lost, the urge to follow show by show, maybe, I think I was probably right around the end of the same period as you, where I think the final year or two, I think, of Gabe's booking era, I think even he would probably admit that it was not his best work in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of fans probably kind of started to lose touch a bit over that period.
Yes, although I will defend 2007 forever, and Alan and Alan 4L and I think, do a good job of that on his Dr. Keith Presents show that we recorded a couple years ago. Plug. But yeah, definitely by '08, right before he left the company, the buzz was gone. And I do think it's possible that it's just impossible to keep that kind of buzz going for that many years. I can't think of another company that did it. ECW certainly didn't. So I don't blame him completely for that one, but it is fascinating to see like the ebbs and flows of the booking. I mean, I think ultimately though, whatever you want to say about Sapolsky as a booker, and he was booker from the beginning until late 2008. Whatever you want to say about him, he certainly had a strength in creating a sense of prestige around ROH. There were a lot of companies that were using a lot of those same guys that might have been a lot more creative than Sapolsky was, but they were not able to build the following, build the name, build the reputation, and just build the star power of the guys the way he was. Just something as simple as making the decision to put the world title on Samoa Joe, and then making the decision that he's just going to keep it for years, and do these 1 hour draws and all this stuff. Like, that's just, that's a booking decision. It's not like the height of creativity, but it's a booking decision that obviously a lot of people had not done in a long time, and it made a huge difference with how popular ROH was. I mean, I think that Samoa Joe title reign is probably like the first thing that really made them like, oh wow, this is like a serious thing. And, Meltzer would talk about how he gave the vibe of the old school NWA champion and all that stuff. That's, you didn't hear about that stuff in IWA Mid-South or in CZW or wherever. So I think that, that there's a reason that ROH stood out from other indies, even if it didn't use all these ideas first, I guess.
Yeah, and I also think, I mean, there's, a lot of people will say about even some of the best bookers that a lot of them would start to kind of, if they were doing the same job for more than 5 years, you could see the kind of burnout and repeat of ideas. So I don't think there's any shame or even anything too negative about even saying that maybe his booking got a little bit stale towards the end. But I think on this podcast, we'll obviously have a lot of time to go over the highs and the lows. So I think before we get get into the review itself, maybe the last thing we need to do is just give a little bit of background on what Ring of Honor was. It's easy to think that everyone's in on this, and probably a lot of people listening will, but it's easy to forget that, this company started 15 years ago, and there's people now that are, were probably toddlers that are now adult wrestling fans that are maybe wondering where this company started, how it came to be, what the landscape was. And it's not even quite, frankly, that easy to even go back, because looking to try and do research, there's not a ton of articles, like official long-form articles on the history of Ring of Honor. There's not even a ton of podcasts about it. I've seen a few. And Sinclair Broadcasting has let most of those early Ring of Honor shows go out of print. Yeah. You can usually find them on eBay for reasonable prices, but for example, for Era of Honor Begins, I already had the show ripped to my computer, but going to High Spots, there was one copy left if someone wanted to buy it. and you can find copies on eBay too. But I don't think there's really an official means of getting those early shows other than just kind of scrounging for it. So, on the background of Ring of Honor was, I guess, what people would call the first super indie, where it's an old story where they've told it over and over again, but Rob Feinstein was the owner and still is of RF Video that created lots of shoot interviews, and their other big thing that propped the company up was they had the rights, and I believe they still do, to all those ECW fan cams, the amateur shot house show footage of those ECW shows. And I think that's still to this day, they had some deal with Paul E where they got those shows. Even after ECW sold to WWE, I think that's still your place to get those fan cams. And obviously when ECW went out of business, that created a huge hole in their, tape selling business. There was there's no new ECW product coming in, so what do? It's crazy to think that their solution was to start their own wrestling promotion. To me, that seems like if you were starting a convenience store, if you were running a successful convenience store and your donuts were selling really well as just one of your items, and then all of a sudden that donut company went out of business and your solution was, let's start our own donut company in addition to the convenience store so we have more donuts to sell.
Well, devil's advocate here. What if the donuts outsold all of your other products by like 10,000 to 1?
Yeah.
Then maybe.
And I was doing some research for this. I was listening to actually a shoot interview Rob Feinstein did basically with himself. And he actually even says, Ring of Honor became such a priority for him that they basically almost stopped they slowed the production of shoot interviews during that era down to a crawl. So basically this company that went from being the home of selling shoot interviews and selling ECW fan cams, and they sold some other stuff, but those were kind of their bread and butter, basically became just by and large the outfit for this promotion that they created. And I think to people that are looking at now and going, what's so special about Ring of Honor? Indie wrestling today is heavily influenced by what Ring of Honor was then. And indie wrestling pre kind of the early to mid 2000s wasn't the indie wrestling that people know today. There was good people there, but it was not just this huge fountain of great talent that was just being looked over. There were guys here and there, but I think in great part because you had WWF, WCW, and ECW. A lot of those guys that were really good got picked up, and there wasn't just this one kind of monolithic company, kind of just basically leaving all these great pieces of talent out to dry because at that point they weren't interested in guys of a certain size. And even just the idea of there was the Super 8 tournament and the King of Indies tournaments, and the idea of even in the early 2000s just companies going, you know what, we're going to take the best indie guys from this scene and a couple from this scene, and we're going to fly them in to do one card, and there'll be enough hardcore fans that will come to make it profitable. That was still a fresh idea. And Ring of Honor's idea was basically seeing stuff like the King of Indies, where you had, guys who came from the Texas Wrestling Academy like Bryan Danielson and Spanky, and taking guys from the Northeast like Homicide and Low Key, and saying, what if we took those kind of super indie level roster and put them into an entire monthly promotion?
Yeah. Well, the King of Indies is like a pretty important point, right? That was like what Gabe Sapolsky always points to. Was he at the King of Indies, or did he see the tape of it?
I'm not even sure, but I remember, I forget if it was the Super 8 or the King of Indies, but I remember even those shows were, I think Meltzer was at one of those shows.
Meltzer was at the King of Indies for sure. And
yeah.
Brian Alvarez wrestled at the King of Indies in a battle royal.
Yeah, I remember that too. Wasn't Super Dragon in that too? For some reason, the idea of Super Dragon and Brian Alvarez in the same ring together is the strangest thing to this day to me.
Yeah, I'm not. I can't find the results of the battle royal, but in the actual tournament, you had Samoa Joe, Frankie Kazarian, Low Key, Vincenzo Massaro, who I guess didn't really do too much after that, unless I'm wrong and he went to Mexico or Japan and became a big star, so I could be ignorant about that. Um, Doug Williams, Adam Pearce, Donovan Morgan, Scoot Andrews, Christopher Daniels, Super Dragon, Bison Smith, Tony Jones, obviously American Dragon and Spanky, and AJ Styles and Jardy France. So, I mean, you hear the list of those names. Very few of those names did not go on to become pretty big deals in at least indie wrestling in the next few years.
And we were having a discussion on Messenger earlier this week about, well, how different was Ring of Honor from other indies? And well, I didn't get enough results really to make me completely satisfied with talking about with authority. The companies I could find, like JAPW and ECWA, which were some of the kind of the preeminent indies of that era, they would have a few of those guys on the shows, but they would fill out with a lot of other guys. And I guess what kind of one of the early things that made Ring of Honor a big deal was that it kind of took those top 3 or 4 pieces from a few different scenes and just said, we're going to fly them all in. They're going to be consistently here. They're going to make us a priority, so they're going to be here every month. It's not going to be like some indies where maybe you have a guy that's going to make 9 out of the 12 shows you run in a year. Generally, what you'll see in Ring of Honor, even surprisingly right from the start, is unlike a lot of indies, if a guy shows up in Ring of Honor, unless they have a Japan commitment or they get signed by WWE, they're going to be showing up at every show.
Yeah, like you said, with a few exceptions. American Dragon first couple years definitely had some periods where he was in and out. But yeah, like once when they commit to a guy, whether it was like Loki or Christopher Daniels or the Maximos or Red, like those guys were reliably present at all of those events, and that's why they were able to actually like build stuff.
And I think that's the point I was going to hit at. I think you put it right on a tee, which is one of the other things that separated Ring of Honor is they were kind of able to make an indie product that, while still really based around wrestling, was a little bit episodic. And in part, they could do that because they eventually grew to be successful enough where they were putting out more than one show a month, and they had a roster that they could count on that would prioritize them so that they would be there. For most of them would be there almost every show. So you could book things as an episodic nature and not have to worry about, oh, we booked this guy in an angle, but he's decided to flake out on us because someone offered him more.
Right. And, obviously other indie promotions did that with their local guys, but, like the fact that ROH could go into their first event and then right in front of the crowd, book the main event of the next event with the 3 top guys. I think that was probably kind of unique, especially when 2 of those guys were from kind of like the West Coast, and this was an East Coast based promotion. I also do think that, like, since ROH was, filling RF Video's ECW void, I also think it filled the ECW void in this part of the country. Like, obviously you had CZW, and that was becoming, I think, more popular at the time. And there was Jersey All Pro, which was, a very good independent promotion. I think most people would agree. But ROH, it sort of filled the void of, like, this was a monthly Philadelphia thing, and it had the vibe of being on the cutting edge. They made sure that was sort of like what they were promoting. And the fact that it wasn't CZW, it wasn't just doing ECW type stuff, it was making its own, like, sort of like revolution, right? Their slogan at the beginning was, "We don't imitate, we innovate." And I think that made a big difference too. It was like, we're Philly, we have the hottest cutting edge wrestling in the country, and ROH is now the new version of that. And I do think that's pretty cool. Like, I think that the idea that they were like, we're going to do the new cool thing. Before it was, in your face, politically incorrect, bloody, violent wrestling, and now it's like, oh, we're sophisticated now. We appreciate mat work and holds. And there really was not a major promotion in the U.S. that kind of had that mission statement, I don't think, where it was like, we are going to be wrestling oriented, and we're not going to be focused on tables And I don't think there was a single table spot on the entire card, right, of this first ROH show.
No, you're. I think you're wrong there. I think the very first match.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
But
Well, quote unquote match.
yeah, that doesn't
We'll get
count.
to that. We'll get
We'll
to
get
that.
that to that soon. But I think your larger point remains intact, which is the scene around the era of the start of Ring of Honor was still full of people trying to fill the ECW void by being ECW. There was a lot of indies that just booked, the old ECW guys that tried to create a product in that same vein. And I think it's really almost surprisingly smart that Ring of Honor, even though they were directly, in a sense, trying to fill the ECW void more than anybody because they relied on ECW fans buying those old tapes, they decided we're going to fill that void but with something different. And while there certainly is an ECW bit of influence and they took ideas from other things, I think one of the real draws of Ring of Honor was all in this time period, two major wrestling companies had died not very long previously, and even the WWE, I guess WWF at that time, you said earlier, you were still enjoying it, and there still was a lot to enjoy, but nothing had that feel of something on the way up, of something new that you were like along for the ride. Everything kind of felt either stagnant or kind of slowly on the way down, or in some cases just crash landing dramatically. And Ring of Honor over the first 2 or 3 years kind of became that this is something a little bit new, and this is something that's on the way up. There's that contagious excitement when you feel like, hey, the crowds are getting a little bigger. More people are talking about this every month. There's some bigger names coming. They're running a little bit more. And even though that's all that stuff's kind of on the periphery of you actually just enjoying the shows, I really do think there's something that makes things a little more fun when you're kind of sensing that something's growing that you're kind of a fan of.
Also, the sense of like sort of like a rebellious thing, like the mainstream is doing this, and fuck that, we're gonna do this, and it's cooler and it's different,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what ECW was, and that's what ROH was. That was they were doing something different to a point.
Yeah, I think the best lesson from the early success of Ring of Honor is try and be the new thing. You're never going to break away by just imitating what was the last successful thing. Like how they always say about wrestling, where the next Hulk Hogan wasn't anything like Hulk Hogan, and the next Steve Austin isn't going to be anything like Steve Austin, and so on. I think it's the same for wrestling. ROH became the next ECW, but they made sure that they weren't, ECW-ish.
Yeah, and they're also the reason that I think ROH is a brand that has value, whereas TNA is a brand that's just basically been ridiculed.
Yeah,
Because
they're the
TNA,
no-name brand.
right, exactly. TNA tried to be WWE and just failed constantly, and ROH didn't. And so even though maybe they didn't have as much money, they never had the star power that TNA had up until recently. Um, they are now a well-regarded, at least brand of wrestling that WWE might want to purchase, as opposed to TNA, which is just like has the same shitty reputation that it had going back to when it started.
And to Ring of Honor's credit, to where they came from, I think Dave Meltzer said in the past that if you were to add together all the kind of affiliates that Sinclair airs Ring of Honor on, syndicated at different times on their different affiliates, they would do about 500,000 people a week. So in terms of audience, they are the second biggest promotion, and they probably spent a hell of a lot less than a lot of other companies, especially TNA, that tried to kind of grab that throne.
Yeah, very much so. The the other thing that's interesting is we were talking about this. ROH, kind of had their group of stars, and they were plucked from different indies around. But if you watch the very first show, it's still very much like a Northeast indie. You have a couple matches where you brought in guys from other parts of the country, and certainly the main event and all that stuff. But if you look up and down the card, it's really like you don't really have that full like all-star roster quite yet.
Mm,
It's that like what you kind of mentioned. It's like there's like a second wave of star power that gets in a few months into the promotion, but they're not there at the beginning.
yeah.
And so, in some ways you watch the show and you're like, oh, maybe it's not that different from other indies, but obviously we'll talk about as we go, like why it was.
Yeah, I think that should lead us right into the review. So I guess we'll start. This is the very first Ring of Honor show ever. For those who want to watch, I know the Ring of Honor official YouTube account has uploaded a couple of the matches. I think they've uploaded Spanky and Jay Briscoe, and not, it was Jay Briscoe versus
Red.
Amazing Red. Yeah, and they've uploaded, I think, Super Crazy versus Eddie Guerrero. So those can be watched for free. You can usually find this on eBay for $10 to $20, and I guess we'll end the show with the recommendation or not. But so this show was February 23rd, 2002, and I guess technically the first thing that opens
Well,
is
actually, sorry.
okay. No,
So
no problem.
I want to talk about a couple things before we get actually into the match. First of all, this was in Philadelphia at a place called the Murphy Rec Center, and every ROH show for the first like few months, and then almost every ROH show for like the first year was at the Murphy Rec Center, except for a couple shows in Boston, a show in Pittsburgh, and a show eventually in New York in the first anniversary. And this was their Philly location until late 2003. So this was sort of like their ECW arena at the beginning, and it was basically just a gymnasium. Um,
Hmm.
there was a basketball hoop in the background. Um, I never was at a show at the Murphy Rec Center. I don't actually know if it even still exists. Um, But how much would you say that that place held? Like just based on eyeballing it.
It's tough because they don't really. There's not a ton of outside brawling, so they don't really show the one side that often. But I would say, I don't know, 450 to 600, and it's weird because the few times they show kind of the backstage, it looks pretty cramped in the backstage too. Like it is very much a gym, and there's all sorts of gyms, but it's a gym that kind of feels like it doesn't feel like a multi-purpose gym. It feels very much like you said. The banners are being hung on the basketball hoops. When guys take bumps on the outside, it's on a hardwood basketball floor where you can see still like all the markings. It's very much a gym.
Yeah, it's yeah, they didn't do much to it. I remember in 2003 when they first put in like lighting, where they like brought in lights and they turned off the house lights, like how crazy that looked. So it's yeah, it's an interesting vibe, but it certainly feels like an indie. I will say that. But I'd say it looked like they had a pretty damn good crowd considering this is like a first pass at an indie show at some gym in Philadelphia. It looked like they had at least like 300 people there. Maybe I'm going a little bit overboard, but it seemed that way to me. I don't know. And the crowd was very reactive and very hot. Um, I mean, in terms of like loudness, I couldn't tell. The camera was too grainy for me to tell just how hot the actual members of the audience were. Um, but I'll be looking for the next show, trying to figure that out. The other thing I wanted to mention before we started is just like this was February 2002. Like, just think about how long ago that was. Like, just in terms of like, it was before TNA started. Before Brock Lesnar ever debuted in on WWF TV. It was when Kurt Angle still had hair. Um, DVDs were not ubiquitous yet, right? Most of the early ROH shows were primarily sold on VHS tape. They
Mhm.
later converted them to DVDs. It was before the Iraq War started, before most people had ever heard of Barack Obama, before Donald Trump even had a reality show. Um, how old was Justin Trudeau in 2002?
He was just a glint in his father's eye.
He's 31
I yeah, okay.
or 30. He was
I'm
30 years
I'm
old.
I'm a bad Canadian.
Yeah, so Justin Trudeau was a very sexy 30 years old at that time, and yeah, most people did not have HD TVs at the time, So you think of yourself like as not for us we think of 2002 as not being that long ago, right? We were both pretty much adults. I was 18, so I was pretty close to that. But it's actually like it's a pretty damn long time ago when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. So so things were different. And it's I just wanted to so I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to add that a little bit of context before we actually got into the world of 2002 indie wrestling.
No, I think that's actually really good. That for some reason, especially the Kurt Angle thing, kind of blew my mind. Just the Kurt Angle has hair still, and I also I guess you just don't. This is the first time. This is the first episode, and Matt's much more experienced than me. So just little things like making sure that my co-host has all said all his thoughts before I move on to the next thing. I'm still a little bit rough, but we'll progress through this, just like Ring of Honor is going to progress. So,
Hobbs, you're already the best podcast host in the business.
oh, that's well, I'm better than Joe Gagne, but other than
Uh,
that,
who isn't?
he'll I don't want to take you down with me, but all right. So, Ring of Honor, the Era of Honor begins February 23rd, 2002, at the Murphy Rec Center. The first thing you see on the show is technically it's a just a highlight video where it blares generic techno music, which we'll be hearing a lot of in early Ring of Honor. Well, we see, and I know how much you love it. You were talking to me earlier this week about that. Well, we see just a few seconds of every wrestler come out, but really the first kind of original content we see is the Hit Squad going to a bus pretty packed full of fans outside Canada that just got there from New York. And they try and kind of rev the crowd up and give them like a rah Ring of Honor speech. And the only real notable thing for me from this was Spanky's in the New York bus. I don't know if he took it there. Actually, he can't do something we'll talk about later, but he must have just been saying hi to the fans. And he's just holding a big bag of Wendy's. And if anyone knows what Brian Kendrick's Wendy's order is, please get in touch with me. I picture him as like a single cheeseburger with a side of nuggets instead of fries, man. I have no idea what his beverage was. I've spent way too much time thinking about this. He doesn't seem like a Coke guy. I don't think he seems like a Sprite guy either. If anyone has any inside information about what Spanky, a.k.a. Brian Kendrick, likes to eat from Wendy's, contact us. We'll give information later.
I'll always remember you saying that Brian Kendrick doesn't look like a Coke guy.
Maybe nowadays he's a little bit haggard. He looks like a different kind of Coke guy. Hey yo. Anyway,
It's just me.
the weird thing is they then show the Hit Squad going to a group of fans from Boston, and they kind of cut the same kind of rah promo, getting the fans hyped up, telling them, you're gonna kiss sports entertainment's ass goodbye. Are you ready to see the greatest wrestling ever? And I guess in a way it's good to kind of introduce to let us know, like, hey, this is kind of a big deal. People are traveling from all over the Northeast to come to this first show. But I always find it kind of weird where companies are telling you how great something is before that thing even really exists. And the fact is, before we even get to the first in-ring segment, we've spent about 10 minutes on this. Like, if you're watching the show for the first time, that's your first 10 minutes.
Yeah, this wasn't. All this stuff was terrible. I'm just gonna go right out and say like that. The opening techno video. Why do we have a video of a medley of people like entering why show all that? I don't understand
And
it.
they show all the entrances later. Like, it's
Right.
not like we're going to show clips of the entrances because we're going to cut them out later. They show the entrances for each guy as they happen later.
Yes, and like all this generic techno music on this show gave me like a headache. Like I don't remember this much techno, like crappy generic techno, being in the culture at large in 2002. Maybe I was sheltered from it, but it just seems like so unnecessary. And then these Hit Squad videos. First of all, I don't think I would have enjoyed being on that bus from New York. I don't know, just something about it tells me that would not have been it would have been an uncomfortable 90-minute ride or however long they took to get, or depending on where they picked everybody up. And then you're stuck on the bus, like you're sitting on the bus, literally, and these wrestlers just come on and start yelling at you about something that you doesn't, like you said, doesn't exist yet. I don't know. I feel like even if they recorded this, they could have looked at it and been like, ah, this didn't turn out so well. Maybe we don't have to include it, or maybe we can edit it a little bit instead of
Yeah,
a literally unedited, like 10-minute video of guys walking around and, waiting to get on a bus and then trying to get people to chant Hit Squad, even though they've never seen the Hit Squad before.
I believe actually also this is the first official Ring of Honor chant ever, which they prompt in the New York bus. I have to think there can't be a reason why anyone would have ever chanted Ring of Honor before that. So I think that is the very first Ring of Honor chant.
Yes, and they were for the record Ring of Honor chants, not ROH chants. Nobody said ROH on this first show. That phrase did not exist yet. Um, I guess but although you did see it on the on the banner.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was a very Bush League way to start it. That's fine. The promotion was an indie, so it's okay that it looked indie. But let's not pretend that it wasn't, that it didn't look indie. And there'll be a lot more shitty techno music throughout the rest of the show. It was just so generic. It just seemed so generic. That was what bugged me about it the most. But this next segment will bug me a lot more, and I feel like we will both have a lot to say about it. So I guess we can mercifully move on to that.
Okay, so the very next segment we cut to about 10 minutes in is the very first in-ring segment in Ring of Honor history. And before I go into this, just remember, this was a company that was sold. Well, we had just been told by the Hit Squad multiple times that Ring of Honor was going to be the thing that let us kiss sports entertainment's ass goodbye. This was going to be pure wrestling. That's how Ring of Honor was sold as, and that's what they were largely looked as, even within those first few years. And this is how they start their first show. There's a tag team comes out, the Christopher Street Connection, which is Buffy and Mace. They were kind of they played the over the top, super stereotypical, effeminate kind of out gay people, and Allison Danger was their manager. And so they come out and I think they're wearing boas, at least one of them. They're kissing fans who want to be kissed. They put a cowboy hat on one of the security guys' heads, and the fans are having a great time. And the segment at first, it would seem kind of weird, but you're completely distracted by the fact that this is also our introduction to the short-lived original Ring of Honor commentary team of Eric Gargiulo, who was a announcer for CZW, and Steve Corino doing color. And this is this is by far the most homophobic kind of skeevy thing I've ever seen in wrestling history related to sexual orientation. And think of how much the ground that covers in wrestling.
Yeah, it's insane. It was insane. Like wrestling has been homophobic going back to the time that probably wrestling was invented. You had these, quote unquote effeminate characters, wink wink stuff about how they're gay, and certainly crowds chanting faggot was not something that was unusual in wrestling. You had people like Adrian Adonis and Adrian Street, just like different people throughout the years, and it was always a offensive portrayal. But this was so much more on the nose and so much more aggressive in its homophobia and almost violent in its hatred of what they were portraying, that it was on a level that I had never personally seen before.
I actually just as I was watching this show, I was taking notes, and I think this is one of the few times where just reading the notes before we kind of give more comments is just going to really illustrate what this is, so I just wrote basically anytime I thought something was really offensive, I wrote it down. So this is all happening while the Christopher Street Connection is kind of just walking around ringside interacting with the crowd. Okay, first, Steve Corino is, quote, real offended, unquote, that the Christopher Street Connection are here. Gargiulo mentions the Christopher Street Connection exchanging favors and wonders if they have to do it in public. Corino says they should do it in the parking lot so we don't have to see it. All the Christopher Street Connection has done at this point in the show is put a hat on a security guard. Then, one of the Christopher Street Connection, I think it was Buffy, or maybe Mace, I always mix them up, kisses a fan in the front row. Gargiulo immediately screams, "He just kissed a fan! He just kissed a fan!" And then Carino has to add in, "And worse than that, he kissed a male fan!" Which Gargiulo replies, "That's disgusting." Then Buffy gets on the mic, and this is the first mic work in the ring in Ring of Honor history. He says that Ring of Honor doesn't want their kind there, which prompts Gargiulo and Carino to both immediately shout, "I don't," in unison pretty much. And then the interesting part is the crowd, which I think if you watch and listen to their reaction, they were kind of having a good time, just kind of with these fun, colorful characters. Because of this mic work and just because of maybe who the crowd are, they start chanting "faggot." And then
and it was, I'm sorry to interrupt the notes, but
no problem.
It was loud, and the commentary was bad, but this was really upsetting as well.
Yeah, and we'll get into more comments in a second, but Gargiulo here then goes on to say, he acts like he wants to say "faggot" too, but he stops himself. And then Creel kind of creepily says, "Oh, I wanted to hear you say it." And then Gargiulo's I think he says he can't because it's written in his contract. And to me, it's laughable that one, indie announcers would have contracts, and two, they'd be so thought out, "Oh, don't say faggot."
Well, also, unless they know that Gargiulo is just so itching to say it all the time, they had to stipulate it in his contract.
Look, Eric, we know you've said it 20 times in this job interview. We're just going to put an extra clause in there. Just get a pen. We'll amend it right now. Then Buffy tells a fan who's chanting "faggot," "I may be gay, but you're queer." And Gargiulo's response to this is to yell, "He just admitted he was gay!" It was the craziest thing, or also not also obvious from the entire way they conduct themselves.
But also, he said, he just admitted he was gay, and I don't think he means happy. Literally, a comment of an 11-year-old boy, the way he reacted to this.
Yeah, I wrote in my thing he was a fourth grader. There's this weird mix of really kind of vulgarness and anger, but also this kind of childlike glee, "Oh, we can't say it, and it's so crazy that the guy's even gay, but we're also angry about it." It's so weird. And at this point, Buffy says Ring of Honor will be the ring of homosexuals, and he starts making out with Mace, and full tongue. That was how far they went with the gimmick back then. And at this point, the Hit Squad runs in and attacks them. Now, before we get into the quick little Hit Squad thing, I have to say, there could be a way to do this angle that isn't horrible. I can see a kernel of the idea of, hey, we're going to show this company's not about sports entertainment, so we're going to bring out kind of the most colorful act on the indies. We're going to have them kind of hijack the show. Gargiulo and Carino talk about how they're not on the sheet for the rundown. They're not supposed to be there. And then they're going to get destroyed by kind of the Hit Squad who kind of represent the company. And that'll be a visual way to show everybody that, hey, Ring of Honor is not about sports entertainment. But the entire time you watch this segment, all you can focus on is Gargiulo and Carino outright, they're not even hinting. They're not even hinting about it. They're not even trying. There's a lot of times through the years, Gold Dust and Billy and Chuck. You've heard commentators try and skirt the line of being edgy or trying to say things but not quite. There's nothing like that. They're literally. There's a point later on. I guess we'll just get to it. The first match in Ring of Honor history is an impromptu, about 1 minute squash of the Christopher Street connection by the Hit Squad. And then afterwards, they put Alice in Danger through a table. And when she gets put through the table, I forget if it's Gargiulo or Carino, says something like, "I bet she wishes that she managed a straight team now." There's no even trying to kind of go on the line between, "Oh, we're going to kind of talk we just hate them because they're colorful characters, but you know what we really mean, wink." They literally say, that's what you get for hanging out with gay people.
It's I don't even know what to say. It's this people could say this was a different time, right? Because obviously we know this wouldn't fly even in wrestling now. I don't think with social media being what it is. But this was 2002. This wasn't like 1981, you know? Like this was unacceptable even then to present something this aggressively angry and homophobic. And I don't know why it wasn't a bigger thing at the time. You know, I've like looked up reviews. Like I'm not trying to insult anybody personally, but I've looked up reviews of this show, just things that other people have written over the years, and I don't see anyone talking about how completely disgustingly offensive this was to not only gay people, but the any person with a sense of social decency and empathy, um, to say that we're gonna bring a couple of people out there and just shame them for their sexuality, whether it's a work or a shoot, and then say that violence is justified against them because of their sexual. I mean, it's like I'm laughing, but it's insane. It's insane how absolutely, like you said, overt they are about the homophobia. I mean, like I know that ROH obviously didn't. The Christopher Street connection existed outside of ROH. That's why they were brought in, and I'm sure other promotions did similar stuff. But this is supposed to be the company that's about, like you said, about serious wrestling, and this was supposed to be their mission statement segment, where their mission statement is what the idea is that they are against gimmicks, which is obviously bullshit. Just if you actually watch ROH, but then they have to like cloud it with this creepy homophobia and this over the top announcing by Carino and Gargiulo. I you know I don't know what people were thinking. I don't know why this was okay. I don't know why this wasn't like news when it happened. To me, this came close to ruining the whole show. Like, if it wasn't for the fact that I got into ROH years later before I knew about this, probably would have turned me off to watching them at all. Honestly,
This was. Oh, sorry.
no, it's just that was how bad it was.
Yeah, this was so bad. We had to talk about it like this week before the podcast. We both had to talk to each other, just like, can you believe how bad this comes off in rewatching? And I know you were pretty down about. You were going, this was only 2002, and this was, people just accepted this, where I kind of looked at it the opposite way, which was, it really bummed me out, but it does kind of show how far we've come in the sense that no wrestling company out in the world today of any significance would do this in a million years. And if they did, they would get destroyed for doing this. And people are going to say, some people listening, I'm sure, are going to be like, oh, you're too sensitive, blah, 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 you're such little snowflakes. To any of those people, I defy you to watch this segment and not tell me that by leaps and bounds, it is the most homophobic thing ever done in wrestling history.
Yeah, and I'll go a step further. If someone says you're too sensitive, you're snowflakes, to reacting this way to homophobia, well, I'm not even going to say go watch it. I'm just going to say go fuck yourself. Like, yeah, seriously, like, yeah, you don't listen to our show. If that's the thing. That's how I feel about this. I'm going to call out anything that I think is offensive, racist, homophobic, misogynistic, because I don't think it's acceptable. And I think that if WWE were to purchase this tape library, and I'm not, I like leaving shows intact, they need to edit this out. This is not something that should be on the WWE network. I know WWE has had their share of terrible things, homophobic things, racist things. The other thing that they did in the past, 15 years that offends me the most, I think, is what they did with Muhammad Hassan. I think that was a completely offensive portrayal. But this should not be on a wrestling show. This is terrible in every possible way. I think it's an embarrassment to the company that they decided to start it like this. I don't know what they were thinking. I can't imagine. If I was in that crowd of people that were chanting that, I would have been extremely uncomfortable and maybe left. So I just think it's terrible.
And
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, what was I going to say? Even if you remove the gay element, it's not a good segment even then, because when this segment is over, we're 20 minutes into the show and we haven't seen a real match yet. Like, this is the first show of the company, and if you bought this tape 20 minutes in, You're not happy at all. I can't see many people happy 20 minutes in.
Yeah, so they literally, their whole thing was they're trying to not be the stupidity of sports entertainment, right? They're supposed to be serious wrestling, you know, kiss sports entertainment's ass goodbye. This is hard hitting in your face, you know, blah, 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 blah. They literally had a segment in which they presented the literal worst of pro wrestling to start their show. The worst
Went,
of pro wrestling. The
went,
worst.
went further than WWE ever did in terms of being directly, like, WWE has skirted, xenophobia, homophobia, race, relations, all sorts of things. But they always, they're smart enough to walk the line. This went so far over the line and just became so direct. It really did feel like you were listening to like almost an audio hate crime.
Yeah, it's exactly what it was. And um, beyond that, this was right around the time that Billy and Chuck were starting in WWF. They'd shown up like a month or so earlier, um, and that was bad too. I'm not defending that. That was really bad. That was homophobic, but it was they gave themselves some degree of plausible deniability, or at least implausible deniability. There's no deniability here at all. I know we're a broken record on this, but it was
Yeah.
it was so offensive to my sensibilities, and it sounds like yours too, that
Yeah, I
it's
know
hard for me to get over it.
we're going in circles a bit, but people have to understand, like, this kind of like vaguely traumatized us. I think watching this, I think we both forgot how horrible this was.
Right, I remember how bad. I remember the segment being bad. I remember when I first watched it in like maybe '05, because I didn't, like you said, people didn't talk about this when it happened. They talked about the main event. They did not talk about this, so I didn't know about it until probably 2005 when I got the DVD, or the tape, I should say, and I thought it was pretty fucking bad then. But I hadn't watched it since then because I didn't want to, and just like you said, the commentary, like noticing that more, makes me realize just how over the top disgusting it was. So it turned me off, but it just like it put me in a negative mood to start the show,
Yeah,
and that's not what you want.
and I think the other thing is, we both kind of talked about how ROH was ECW inspired, but they didn't try and be ECW. I feel like in some ways this is the most ECW Ring of Honor ever was, where it had that feeling of we were trying just so hard to shock you, but we're kind of being almost like fourth grader about it. And we put a woman through a table, and we just have brash guys yelling about how you're here for fucking ROH, rah, rah. Like it felt very different than what the company would quickly establish itself as being, yet it's the first impression they gave.
Yep, exactly. And I will say, just as an aside, so this was also like probably the way they wanted to build up the Hit Squad, as being like their maybe their Dudley Boys or whatever they wanted them to be. Never really quite materialized, but they were Mafia, who is Dan Moff, and Monster Mac. And they, like I said, they didn't last that long as a tag team, but Moff ended up getting into better shape and became a pretty big part of the first 3 years or so of ROH, which maybe wouldn't have expected from watching this segment.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's enough about that. Although, again, I think it's crazy to think the first match in Ring of Honor history is the Hit Squad beating the Christopher Street Connection. And it's also, they cut another Raw Ring of Honor promo, which we've already seen them do 2 of them to different groups of fans. So that's the third one in 20 minutes. Just a horrible way to start the show. But then we get to what I would finally call the first real match in Ring of Honor history.
And the way they should have opened the DVD cold was with this match.
Yes, is Jay Briscoe versus the Amazing Red. Now, for people that don't know the Amazing Red, because he still wrestles, but I don't think he's nearly as active, and he's been kind of slowed down with injuries. He was kind of the 2000s, I would say, the first hot indie high flyer. The way there always seems to be one guy that kind of has that mantle above everyone else, where it was Jack Evans, and then Pac, and Ricochet, and now we kind of got Will Ospreay. When people really started paying attention to U.S. indies and it started to kind of grow as a scene, I feel like he was kind of the first flyer that was like the hot guy.
Yeah, definitely for this era, where it was like you had the
the super indie era. Like, yeah, it was Red was especially in the East Coast. Like, he was the guy on the scene. He was a main eventer in a lot of those promotions too.
Yeah, and the first crazy thing you think of is if you think of the Briscoes these days, you think of these big burly guys with the big beards and the ever-changing hairstyles, and well, they're maybe not huge burly, but they're muscular guys, and you come out and see this, and you see Jay Briscoe looking, got some zits. He's young, got the little chin strap beard, shaved head, singlet, kind of shrimpy, and he has none of that kind of redneck, kind of crazy charisma he would develop. He's very much an 18-year-old boy, and he's a young 18-year-old too. Like, I think he turned 18 a month before this show.
But he was able to grow a beard, which is better than I could say for myself at 18. So,
Well, a chin strap, but
sure.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think both these guys were 18, and so the match itself, in what's going to become kind of a pattern for the show, it doesn't go on that long, and it's the first match where I'm going to have to do something we'll probably have to do a lot on the show, which is kind of compare what we would have thought of it then to kind of what we see it as now. Because I think at the time, this probably would have been a lot better to me. I still enjoyed it in 2017, but it is very much a kind of dated match where they're doing big moves. They're not doing a ton other than big moves. They're trying really hard. They're not going that long, but when something's not built on kind of story and selling and stuff like that, those moves kind of date themselves a bit.
Well, yeah.
I thought both looked really good in certain ways. I thought Red's kicks looked really great. Like they kind of were really fast while still kind of looking impactful, even though they were kind of showy, which I think a lot of guys can't pull off. I think Jay's offense looked really good, I thought. And it's crazy how good just some of the stuff he could do for being 18 was. He pulls out a muscle buster, which I forgot he did. This is months before Samoa Joe shows up. And it actually kind of looks better, I think, than Samoa Joe's muscle buster.
Yeah, so, like, I mean, I have a lot of the same thoughts. Like, first of all, the first thing I put down on my notes was, though, the Briscoes are, like, they did a promo, and they're awkward teens, right? But Red's promo, I think, is even more awkward. He was not good. These guys were not good at promos. They're like, Red was just like, I'm the only member of the SAT that wrestles singles. Like, just like, okay, like, doesn't really show much personality. But the crowd was really hot for them. Like, they were really into the match. And, there was, good opening back and forth. I agree with you about the kicks from Red. And, Jay's offense was cool, good big boot. But Jay's muscle buster was so early in the match. Like, this is like, the kind of stuff people talk about when it comes to indie wrestling, as far as, muscle, like, just like big moves, like way too early, no context. I actually wrote down in my notes, quote, shockingly, the selling is poor. And it was, Jay hits the muscle buster, Jay hits the J driller, and Red kicks out. And by the way, I think the J driller might be the most kicked out of finisher ever in wrestling, and I'm going to actually keep a tally, starting with this show, of how many times people kick out of the J driller. So we have one, in the very first time it was ever used, right here. And then the very next offensive move is by Red. I made sure to note that, right after the J driller. The very next offensive move is by Red. The Red alert kind of missed when Red did it. Kind of sort of became a leg drop. But this is like pretty much exactly what you'd expect from two very good but very green young indie wrestlers in 8 minutes, which is basically they do a lot of cool moves. Their selling is non-existent, and there's really not much sense of escalation in the match.
Yeah, it really is just let's throw everything out there and in this short amount of time. And I will say, I wouldn't call this by any means a great match, or maybe even not a good match, but it's still fun to watch, and at least in my opinion. And at 8 minutes, or right around 8 minutes, I don't think it should have gone any longer than it did. I think they found the right amount of time for the kind of match they were doing. I think the couple things that were my biggest nitpicks, other than just the basic things we've gone over, was Gargiulo at the start starts talking about how, you know, Jay's the grappler and Red's the high flyer. I think Jay goes to the top rope more than Red in this match, and he gets caught almost every time. And I think Red throws more punches than Jay in this match. So it's kind of funny. I think this is the first of a couple times where the commentary, even though they're doing, I'm pretty sure, taped commentary well after the show was done, they kind of lead the commentary in a direction the match isn't going to go in.
I'm actually not sure if the commentary at the early shows were taped. I know they certainly became taped shortly thereafter, but I'm not positive if they were taped at this one. I'd actually be curious to see if someone knows for sure.
I think it was, because there's also a segment later where we see Steve Corino backstage, and it just seems like that. There's just reasons in the way it sounded that makes me think it was taped. But my other big, huge flaw in this match is there's a spot here that is, sometimes I think the phrase business exposing is kind of cringy and annoying and overused, but there's no better way to describe this, where Jay Briscoe was going to do a move off the top rope. Red kind of stuns him, and so Jay's kind of sitting on the top turnbuckle.
Yeah.
Red goes across the ring to the other turnbuckle and climbs to the top and jumps off, and Jay spears him, except Red only gets halfway across the ring. Like, it's one of those moves where there is no conceivable way he could have gotten completely across the ring from end to end. He literally only did that move to put himself in position to be countered. Like, it looks completely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's one of those moves. Yeah, it's where it's like, what could you possibly have been trying to do there?
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. It's one of those things where it's like, all right, these are 18-year-old guys like that didn't totally know what they were doing yet, so they were just gonna do a lot of moves, and that's literally all it is. And if you can tolerate that, it was fun. If you can't tolerate that, then you will not be able to tolerate this.
Yeah, and other than that, I'll say, just to sum up, like you said, fun, impressive that they could do the kind of things they were doing for 18 minutes. They worked their butts off, but I think it's also... 8 minutes. Oops, sorry. I think it's also safe to say they both got significantly better.
Yeah, and obviously, especially Jay Briscoe.
Yes.
Who became a legitimately great wrestler. But yeah, it was something. By the way, one thing that we skipped, and I think this is important if we're going to be reviewing Ring of Honor shows, is the Code of Honor.
Yes.
The Code of Honor, that was sort of like the mission statement of ROH early on. And I have the original Code of Honor written down here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the original Code of Honor, which is kind of what made ROH at the beginning, was there were 5 rules. One was you must shake hands before and after every match. And everyone up to a point followed this. Even when guys were unconscious, someone would come and just pick up their hand and shake it. 2, no outside interference, which was a big deal in early ROH, and actually something that very much appealed to me, because that was something that, over in the Attitude Era, in the ECW era, definitely was overdone, so that was very refreshing. 3 was no sneak attacks, which I'm not totally clear on what that means. People were definitely sneak attacked. I'm not totally clear on what that means. No harming officials was the 4th one, and I like that one too, because I hated ref bumps. They were so overused. Now they're a little bit more sporadic, so I don't mind them as much, but I always thought ref bumps were really stupid. I just, especially because guys would get bumped, very lightly and be unconscious for 12 minutes. I thought that was just, of all, the very common wrestling tropes, that was the one that always bothered me the most. And then 5, no purposefully disqualifying oneself. Definitive winners by pinfall or submission only. And I think all those were good for separate. People could say, oh, it's too indie-rific, too serious, all that stuff. But in 2002, that was a really cool breath of fresh air in American wrestling. I don't know if you agree or not.
Oh yeah, because people have to remember, in early 2002, we're not that far away from the heyday of Vince Russo. So even if if you hear Matt go down the rules and go, oh, some of that, I like some of that in my wrestling sporadically. Well, I do too, but wrestling was so just saturated with that in the previous few years that you almost this was kind of almost the pendulum swinging the other way, which was just people feeling like we have to kind of create a safe home where this stuff just doesn't exist because people have been getting it shoved down their throat so much.
Yeah, so that keep that in the back of your mind as we review all these matches. This is sort of like the mission statement of ROH. These matches are going to be based on winners and losers, athleticism, and they're going to be clean.
Mm-hmm. So then I think we can go to the next segment. And one thing I do want to point out is something Ring of Honor did. I forgot how much they did it early on, and that, quite frankly, modern indies could take a page out of. It's just quick little backstage promos and vignettes between almost every match, like 30 seconds or a minute. And like you said, the Briscoes and Red ones weren't good, but at least they were trying to kind of glue things together a little bit
and introduce you to their stars. Yeah,
and there was a little bit of angle stuff we can get to where, nowadays modern indie wrestling, a lot of promotions, it is literally all ring. No promos at all. At most, maybe you get a promo for a guy after he wins a big tournament or something, or a title. He'll do it in the ring. But Ring of Honor was kind of, throughout the show, full of these little tiny segments to kind of either introduce you, like you said, or set up something for the next show, or plant a little seed somewhere. And I really do appreciate that. It breaks up the show. It makes things more entertaining. It makes you feel like you're seeing more than just a collection of matches.
Yeah, exactly. And you know who you're watching. Like that's important. Like just like I mean, it's not like too many of these promos were good. Most of them were pretty bad, but they existed, and that showed it made it feel like more of a proper promotion as opposed to just like here's a bunch of matches.
Yeah. And it's funny, I kind of hype them up, but then before the next match, we get 2 short segments that are maybe make me look stupid because they were pretty bad segments. We get a Homicide segment, where our first Ring of Honor introduction to Homicide, where he is outside in some bulldozed over looking area in New York, where he's talking about how this used to be his neighborhood. And it's such a weird segment where I would say it's horribly awkward while also being kind of Homicide-tastic, where you can see his charisma, and he's trying real hard to tell you how street he was, but he's also not quite as confident.
Or making sense.
Yeah. This is where I live, man. This is full. I can't believe... you keep saying I think he keeps saying he can't believe what happened to his neighborhood, but doesn't really tell you.
Yeah.
And then the this will come into play later. The cherry on top is he finds a rubber chicken in his old neighborhood.
Well, so first you have a little quick Loki promo, and I wrote Loki is not a great promo, and then I put Homicide, also not a great promo, but at least he had charisma, and he did. His also just the logic of his promo didn't follow. He was like my neighborhood is gone. That was the whole thing. He goes, we used to survive in the streets. That's why we wear these masks. We want to hide our faces. And I'm just like, how does one of those clauses relate to the other one? You used to survive in the streets. That's why you wear the masks. You want to hide your face. That's what? And how does any of that connect to each other? It doesn't make any sense. And then all I have is this chicken, which the announcers later said, okay, he found the chicken left in his neighborhood. It was a rubber chicken, but that was not what he said. It was very confusing, but I guess you got to hear Homicide talk, and that was fun.
Yeah, I think your description where he was a guy with charisma, but he had no idea what to do to cut a promo here.
Yeah. He never became a really good promo, but
no.
He said he had his way about him. Let's say that.
Him being Homicide kind of carried him through things.
Yes. And he says, it's going to be an honor to kick all your asses. That's what he says at the end of the promo.
One of the first of a lot of honor puns we are going to get to throughout this show. The history of, maybe not this episode, but in general. And then there's one other little quick, very brief segment where Xavier is giving encouragement to Eric the Towel Boy, which again, at this point in the show, Eric the Towelboy was a guy who worked a little bit, I guess, on the indie scene. He's a shrimpy, very young-looking guy who we later see a segment of him toweling off the ropes as the crowd cheers. And I think it's just, again, we have to remind people, we're probably 30, 40 minutes into this show, and the amount of what I would consider sports entertainment to not sports entertainment is a very high ratio, the opposite of which ROH was promising people.
Yeah, I mean, it got better as the show went on, but
It
yeah,
did.
it was. Yeah, I mean, what like this this serious hardcore wrestling promotion? Why even have this thing with this guy, the Towel Boy? Like I don't completely understand this, but
There
hey,
has to be more of a story, but
yeah.
we won't dig. Then we'll get to finally another real wrestling match, and that would be Xavier versus Scoot Andrews, who are both guys that, again, are people that if you are only kind of a more recent indie fan, you probably haven't heard of at all. And Xavier will go on to some pretty big things in the company. He'll become their Ring of Honor's second ever champion, their first heel champion, the first guy to really get an extended run with the title. And Scoot Andrews was a guy, I have to admit, I don't have a ton of experience watching him, but I do kind of remember realizing that I think he was around 34 at this time. He was kind of one of the bigger indie names of kind of the era before the indie boom really happened. And I believe he has a promo right before this match where he talks about how the year before he made his name on the national scene. So obviously he had gotten to a certain point. But when you see the match here, it's funny. Xavier gets the bigger push going forward, but I honestly thought Scoot Andrews looked better than Xavier here. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I thought they both looked fairly solid. Like they were just like solid wrestlers, but it was only a 10-minute match. And by the way, more generic techno for both of those guys. Obviously.
Oh, it's Scoot Andrews' theme, which is like a techno remix of 2000. Because Scoot Andrews, by the way, is the Black Nature Boy.
Yeah.
So it's like this weird 2001 techno remix that like breaks down. Like this song almost seemed to invent dubstep like years before it happened. It just kind of and it just it is so it is on a night of regrettable music choices. This is easily the worst.
By the way, what makes him the Black Nature Boy? Because it's previously all the guys who were called Nature Boy, they had the similar thing where they had the bleached hair and the robe and they strutted and stuff. And at least at this point, Scoot Andrews just is a guy. He walks to the ring. He's just a guy. So I don't know what that nickname is supposed to signify. But anyway, yes, there's that. But yeah, unlike in the previous match, they actually do some chain wrestling. They have a fast pace. They there's a flow to the match. And I don't know. There's actual selling going on in the match. So I thought they both looked pretty good. But yes, Scoot impressed me because I don't know how many ROH shows he did after this one. Definitely not that many. But he was a good wrestler. He knew what to do. It was probably at best if we're gonna do this whole star rating thing 2 3/4 3-star match. But it was solid, I would say. And I it's hard for me to say which guy I thought was better. Because obviously I've seen great matches with Xavier and I already know he's a capable wrestler. He didn't seem to have a ton of charisma here, and it's still interesting that they decided to go with him as a heel. I guess maybe maybe based on what he did in other places that I've never seen. But here he was just fairly generic, and just they both seemed just solid, I would say.
I would say maybe, I don't know how much this plays into it, but Xavier probably has the most WWE perfect look of anyone on this card. He's got a really good build. He's got some bulk to him. He's got a very good-looking guy to the point where the crowd, this is the first time we hear AC Slater chants for him. And so
this was before, I guess, Mario Lopez was on Access Hollywood or Extra, whichever one he does.
I'm still waiting for those extra chants. But yeah, he would be a guy that if he was a couple inches taller, he probably would have been snatched up by WWE in an instant because he had that look. He almost gives off kind of a Tony Nese-ish vibe in terms of appearance, maybe without the beard. I think my bigger problem with Xavier is he's very punch-kicky in some parts of this match. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Xavier's horrible, but I also think the more punches you throw, the better the punches should be. And they're just kind of average, and he kind of relies on them a fair bit here. And you compare that to Scoot, who has a real nice kind of snappy short arm clothesline out of nowhere. And just he has a real, compared to Red versus Jay Briscoe, where they're doing really huge moves, but you can tell they're still young. Here, they're not doing moves quite as big, but you can tell, especially with Scoot, but with both of them, they have kind of a bit more of that polish.
Yeah, there are a couple of like awkward things, like Xavier kind of tries to do like a back, like almost like pancake spot, but almost drops Scoot like right on his head.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, so there's little stuff that makes you feel like, oh yeah, it's still indies. But there's cool stuff too. Like there was a reversal from a sunset flip into like sort of a reverse DDT by Scoot. Some good stuff there. And then Xavier just wins kind of with a basic neck breaker. But like I said, yeah, some good moves and better selling than previous matches. But it still felt like kind of like a Raw match. Just like a rushed version of what could have been a more dramatic match.
And there is some roughness, like you said. There's the spot where Scoot, I don't know whose fault it was, where Scoot kind of on a pancake type or backdrop type move kind of ends up falling basically head first. That could have been really scary. And there's also a spot where Xavier's hitting some moves, and then he hits the ropes and comes back, and Scoot has bumped and just is lying on his back, and Xavier clearly wasn't expecting that. So he kind of just shrugs and then gives an elbow drop and then pulls Scoot back to his feet and hits the ropes again. So you're thinking, oh man, this has got to be a big spot to repeat it. What's he going to hit? And it's just like a running forearm.
Yeah.
Like I don't know why. I don't know why he felt the need to like repeat everything to get to that hot move. But
yeah, maybe just nerves because it's clearly such a big event based on what they were all hyping.
Yeah.
But there's also another, Scoot hits his finisher, the Force of Nature, and Xavier gets his foot on the ropes, and it's like already 2 matches, people are getting out of people's big moves. It's just like, it's
and I'm sorry.
It's just funny how they immediately go to their biggest moves getting kicked out of in like the opening 2 matches of still just what is mostly a random indie show at this point.
Yeah, and it did. They were obviously trying to set up there will be a future matches between these guys, but it did kind of the match. I feel like I thought I was enjoying this. It wasn't a great match by any means, but it was enjoyable enough. But I felt like it was starting to lose steam near the end. And so this end part where, Xavier clearly gets his foot under the ropes and Scoot basically just stops what he's doing and starts arguing with the ref, which leads to Xavier getting the win. It kind of just took the steam out of the end of the match. And I also thought it was pretty hilarious when Xavier has his foot under the ropes, Gargiulo asks Carino, did he get lucky or was that ring awareness, Steve? And Steve Carino's reply is, I don't know, but it was a lucky break for Xavier. And it's like, you're kind of giving the answer that you're going, I don't know if it was lucky or not, but it was lucky. It was just a weird commentary moment.
Yeah.
But, and the one other thing I thought was funny was, when Carino put over Xavier as being a student of the game because he got his start as a security guard for wrestling shows.
I wrote that down too. That's pretty funny.
And he didn't protect the fans or the wrestlers because he was too busy watching the matches, studying things. And I thought that is like the weirdest way to put over someone's dedication ever. Like he was such a big wrestling fan, became such a student of the game. He let your sister get punched in the face while, he was watching the hot low-key versus Red match in JAPW or something.
Right. Big student of the game, so he did not do his job. Like, that's pretty much what we're getting at here.
So overall, I think we both agree that was kind of, it's not a horrible match, nothing super notable, but
I say it's solidly good match, but like
yeah,
just like a Raw match, not like anything more than that.
yeah. So at that point, I don't know if there was any. I paid better attention to the kind of between match segments. Later on in the review, I started taking more notice. But I think the next thing we have now is, unless you have more to say about that match.
No, I think we exhausted that particular
Yeah.
match.
The next thing we have is the Natural Born Sinners, which is Homicide and Boogaloo versus the Boogie Knights. So all your Boog quotas are satisfied here of Mike Tobin and Danny Drake. The Boogie Knights gimmick is basically that they're from New York, and they're from New York. And did I mention they're from New York? They come out wearing New York stuff. They come out to The Best Around from the Karate Kid movie, which is a good choice.
At least it was a song as opposed to just like generic like bum 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 da 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 do 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 do. That's my techno impression.
And the Natural Born Sinners, it's strange, but Homicide's start in Ring of Honor was as a tag act, and he and Boogaloo come out in orange jumpsuits and horror movie masks. One has a Michael Myers mask. One has, I don't know if it's a Leatherface mask or not.
Well, they're from the street, so they wear the masks.
Yeah, that's, I know whenever I get stuck up by somebody, they're always wearing like a Freddy Krueger mask. That's how I know they're legit. And I think Boogaloo has like a chainsaw, and Steve Corino and Gargiulo on commentary are trying so hard to put over how scary these two are. Like, all night the commentary is way too loud, and they're trying way too hard to put over everything to the point it seems fake.
Well, they say the same. They have the same like talking points about each wrestler that they yell like 75 times. Like, these guys are so that these guys are so like, it's just like you hear that so many times.
But I think this is the worst they get. Is other than the crazy homophobia, but
yeah.
this is They just start screaming about how everyone's scared of these guys, how promoters won't book them, how everyone in the back is scared of them, how brutal they're going to be, and then Boogaloo starts the match with like a minute or two of amateur chain wrestling.
Yeah, I know. And they're like, these guys are so dangerous, so scary, but they're also amateur champions.
It is hilarious having to. This is what I was referring to earlier, where the commentary kind of works against these matches sometimes. Where it's hilarious to have to hear Gargiulo try and like work this into the narrative he just built, like you were saying, like, oh, but they're killers, but they can kill you on the mat too. Like, ooh, like it was pretty funny to hear. Like, just again, if this was taped, they really should have watched it before they did the commentary. Maybe they'd do a rush job if that's the case, but I have to think if they had really planned this out, they wouldn't have done stuff like that.
Yeah, but who knows? Maybe they just had bad instincts. Like, that's possible too. Yeah. Gargiulo, by the way, clarifies the chicken situation. He says that the chicken is a symbol, that Homicide has nothing to go back to. So, they're working on a deeper level there. The chicken is the signifier, and the signified is related to the loss of Urban Decay. So, they're actually they're going on a pretty graduate school level there.
Yeah, this is like The Wire season 6. I think that's pretty crazy because he found the chicken randomly in his old neighborhood. If I could just walk somewhere and find random chickens, I don't know, life's looking pretty good to me. I don't get it, but this match it's weird. It's about 7 minutes, but it really feels like it could have been half that length because it is nothing but a squash match, right. And I feel like a squash match would have more impact when it's just like. There are some big moves here, but I feel if you want to get guys over as killers, you do 3 or 4 minutes, you hit all your big moves, and then you go, you just end it.
Right. And the Boogie Knights maybe hit 3 offensive moves in the entire match. Yeah.
They get a very brief hot tag. They get to do a dive at one point when everyone's hitting dives. But yeah, for the most part, this is a 7-minute squash match. I mean, at different points in the match, I believe Gargiulo and Corino both say they expect the Natural Born Sinners to win, so they're not even pretending,
right.
Trying to build any drama. It's just they're basically telling you this is a squash. I did come away impressed at I think Homicide's offense looked great. He kind of hit most of his greatest hits here. He hit a great tope where Homicide's topes always look great, and they always look so reckless, and here he kind of go bowls over the guardrail.
Yeah.
I thought, the Ace Crusher, like he pulls out the cop killer later, his. Oh, go on.
Well, what's interesting is, like, for most of the match, I'd say Boogaloo actually gets more time to shine than Homicide. But then Homicide gets this hot tag, and it's probably like one of the best defensive sequences of the night. I guess like does the half Nelson. They do a half Nelson clothesline double team suplex, which the crowd goes nuts for. So it's like it was a fairly decent way to put over, I guess, the quality of the Natural Born Sinners' offense. It was interesting how much time Boogaloo got to shine, though, considering that he disappeared not too long after this.
Yeah, and again, the choice of, we're going to come out these scary guys, and I'm going to go right to like the double leg takedown and kind of working you on the mat. And he wasn't bad at that at all, but it did seem kind of counterproductive to the image that they and the commentators were trying to really sell them as. Like, it's just weird to see a guy come out in a Halloween Michael Myers mask and a guy come out in a leather face mask, and then it's just, oh yeah, I'm from the streets, but I also took this collegiate wrestling class. I was pretty good at bantamweight, and it was just weird. But yeah, I think that helped.
Yeah, I'm from the streets and I had nobody, but like my wrestling coach would check in very regularly, and we would go on long trips on tournaments, and just like it's kind of funny like that the dissonance there.
All I had was this tape of the 1996 Olympics. We were too poor to watch anything else, so I just watched that gold medal match over and over, and that's where I got these skills, man. But yeah, it was an enjoyable squash. I think what you pointed out, that tiger suplex while the guy is also getting hit with a lariat. I feel like that's something that wrestlers should lift. A tag team should lift that today because it looked really great, actually. And no one really does that now, I don't think.
No, they don't. And of course, those rubber chicken shots that Homicide started hitting on the Boogie Nights at the end for the DQ were seemed actually like they probably hurt.
Yeah, so we should get to the finish. Is for some reason, even though they've been dominating the match, Homicide and Boogaloo get frustrated. Well, Homicide, and he brings out the rubber chicken. Again, we're supposed to be scared of these guys and they're psycho, but they also use a rubber chicken. And he starts wailing on the Boogie Nights with the rubber chicken, and we get our first disqualification in a coming that's supposed to shy away from that.
But actually, I almost think that there's something to do with like showing that ROH is not ECW in the sense that like, oh, you would get disqualified for garbage shit, which
Yeah.
So I could see it both ways.
Ring of Honor is not about rubber chickens. We had to establish that early. But so ref H.C. Loke disqualifies them, and then we get the post-match angle, which is going to lead to bigger things later on throughout the first year of Ring of Honor, where Homicide pulls out a spike and jabs it right in the ref H.C. Loke's head. H.C. Loke seems to blade for a very extended period of time, and I don't know if it was just the quality of the blade job or the quality of like the kind of grainy camera video quality of this first release, but there was a lot of blading, and you didn't get that impressive of a blade job out of it.
No, but at the same time, it's like it kind of worked in the sense that like his head was carved up as opposed to just gushing blood, and that does make sense if you're going to be like jabbed in the head with a spike a few times.
Yeah, and later on, we get to an H.C. Loke promo later, and actually the gig marks on his head look pretty gnarly. They're all kind of crusted over with blood. Yeah. And honestly, they look a lot worse than the blade job. Like that's when you look at it and go, geez, he really did cut himself pretty bad here.
Well, maybe they just redid it backstage for that promo. I'm being serious.
Wow, that'd be crazy if they did, but honestly, that might be because those gig marks look pretty long and huge, and I can't imagine not getting a lot of blood out of those.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, but it does. Yeah, it definitely sets up some stuff that the cop killer on Loke was really devastating, and I guess it sets up the Carnage crew, who turned out to be one of the big ROH tag teams for a few years there.
Yeah. So again, it's weird. This is our second squash match out of the first four matches.
Yeah, I would say the match was boring. The angle was surprisingly violent.
Yeah, and it's I guess the first kind of angle we get. I guess you could. I wouldn't really count the Xavier scoop kind of ref bump thing. I mean, not ref bump, but foot under the ropes thing as a angle. This is the first thing that's really kind of overtly leading to something bigger that feels like an angle. And again, I enjoyed the Homicide's offense. I felt like you could have cut this in half and made more of an impact, and it's again a little bit of a weird thing where Ring of Honor is known for such long kind of letting the wrestlers work and long matches, and we're getting a lot of these between match segments, and we're getting some angles, and we're getting 2 squashes in the first 4 matches.
Yeah, this is something that I think, within a year or two, a promotion would have done very differently. Promotion with the mission statement of ROH, which is like, we wrestle here, the fact that they did not let anyone go out and have a 15-minute, like, great wrestling match in the first half of the show, or pretty much at all, is interesting. Like, it's a surprising choice.
Yeah, and so we can go on to the next segment, which is we get to see the Christopher Street connection again.
They have the hots for Spanky.
Yes, one of them is selling and debating, saying that they don't know if they belong in Ring of Honor, and then the other sees Spanky dancing, and they decide that they do belong there because they're gay and there's a hot guy there, so that means, of course, that's worth going to a place where you're going to get the living shit beat out of you every month because, hey, one hot guy in the world.
But now listen. I think the Christopher Street connection in general is a regressive gimmick. Like, it's kind of like we're going to make a spectacle of flamboyant gay men, and I'm not, even when they're faces, it's like, okay, like, this isn't great, but I would accept something like this. If like this is how they want to present the Christopher Street connection, like sort of like. It's like, oh, they're going to stick around because, this guy's hot and, like, whatever. Again, it's regressive. It's not what I would do, but I wouldn't, like, go on a tear about it. But they just had to take it that one extra level, and it's just, like, it's so unnecessary.
The Christopher Street connection, they are good at playing that gimmick. There's no subtlety to that gimmick, and I can see why people would find it it is a stereotype, and why some might find that offensive. But they are good at playing that kind of over-the-top, pushing the button kind of effeminate, stereotypical queens.
Yeah, I mean, in another world, in another context, I think, it might even be empowering, but that's not what they're going for. So, so I don't think it's that in this case.
Yeah, so that brings us to our next match, which is kind of the first of something that will become kind of a Ring of Honor staple, although with a different name, because on the back of the DVD, this is billed as an Ultimate Aerial Elimination match, and it will later, in kind of maybe a slightly modified form, just be something that will be called a Scramble match. And it's a big multi-person elimination match. Brian XL versus Chris Devine versus Quiet Storm versus the SATs, Joe Maximo and Jose Maximo, and the Amazing Red. And this match starts with we get special referee Mikey Whipwreck, and he comes in the ring, and before Amazing Red comes out, everyone else is already there, and he talks about how everyone in the ring is one of his student trainees, except for Brian XL, who he calls Bow Wow. But then when I looked up online, it credited Brian XL as being trained by Mikey Whipwreck, so I'm not sure if he gets training afterwards or this was just something for a comment, but he finally brings out Red, and first we just have to say how crazy it is that Mikey Whipwreck trained a bunch of these crazy high flyers. Like, to me, that's when you hear like Mr. Hughes trained AR Fox and these crazy high flyers today. That's the same kind of thing where you go, there's a guy not associated with that style at all, yet that's who he seems to be pumping out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess training maybe doesn't really incorporate that stuff so much. Like the high flying, that's more of something people do on their own. I mean, I don't know. I guess I don't really know what I'm talking about, so I should refrain from guessing.
Oh, that doesn't stop me. But yeah, this is, I would say, probably the most dated match on the show because it is built, again, any match, I don't have any problem with matches that are just crazy spot fests, but obviously when you're watching a show 15 years later, if a match is built just on crazy spots, there's always going to be new, crazier spots. But I think even judging it, I mean, there's stuff that still is pretty cool to see even 15 years later. But one thing you can tell the difference between this match and kind of the crazy spot fests of these days is there's just a level of like mechanical polish that isn't there. Everything looks a little bit rougher. Everything looks a little bit like, just even when stuff hits, it looks a little bit more like, oh, they barely hit that sometimes. It's it's kind of where the standard of indie high flying was in the early 2000s, I think.
Well, on the bright side of this match is that we get to see why Red is so good, because he's so much more, like, just compared to all these guys, he was so much faster and so much smoother than everything he did. Like, everything in this match, well, I don't want to say everything. So much of this match was very, like, awkward. There's just a lot of, like, tumbles, but there wasn't a lot of smoothness to it. And so it just felt like you're just watching the same thing happen over and over again at a certain point, except when Red was in there. And he looked like on another level from all the other guys.
Yeah, I mean, and he's definitely, he's portrayed as the star pupil, and his performances live up to that. And this is the first match on the show. I think it goes around, 15 minutes or so, where it gets some real time, obviously, but they kind of do that thing a lot of elimination matches do, where they want everyone to get their chance to shine. So basically, almost all the eliminations come right near the end, just bam, 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 bam. Again, it's crazy spot after crazy spot. There's dives, there's things that don't hit, there's things that barely hit. There's a moment where they're doing one of those kind of spots where one guy's suplexing another guy who's power bombing a guy, and everyone's supposed to hit a spot all together, and the SAT get in position, and Chris Devine and Quiet Storm aren't there yet, so they just have to kind of hold, like, oh, we're gonna hit something, but they just have to hold it, which was another kind of rough-looking spot until everyone gets in position. But really, it's kind of crazy because there's a lot that happens in this match, but there's not much to say. It was just, there wasn't much that, it is something that Gabe would go back to over and over again throughout most of his Ring of Honor run. He's kind of pared it back now that he books in Evolve, in kind of modern-day Evolve, which is just, I want to break up the card with just something crazy. I'm just going to throw out anywhere between 4 and 6 guys and tell them to go nuts and do whatever, and preferably high flyers. And it's going to be kind of meaningless and and some of these matches turn out to be really good. This one, I would say, I don't think even by 2002 standards, it was great. I think it ages pretty poorly, even though there are still some few cool spots. I think my biggest lasting impression from it is Mikey Whipwreck selling exhaustion from watching the match by slumping on the ropes, and then later, like, whooping the crowd up like it was Def Comedy Jam. Like, I don't know if I love that or hate that. Like, he was, this idea that this guy who had trained most of the wrestlers was reffing it, and, like, he was doing everything he could to try and put these guys over in addition to what they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not a bad thing, all things considered. But yeah, this match, like, it was I guess entertaining for like the first 5 minutes or so, because it was just like a whole bunch of stuff happening, and then that same stuff keeps happening and none of it's very good, so your eyes start to kind of roll back of your head a little bit. Like, it wasn't interesting, you know what I mean? Like, they were trying hard, I appreciated it, but it was just very flat, like just like all the other matches I mentioned, like no sense of escalation. It was just like there was no ebb and flow to it. It was just like a bunch of stuff, and it just never stopped happening. And then, you had the high spots. The Spanish Fly was a cool move. I think that's still a cool move. Although, people do it like a one-man Spanish Fly. That's fairly common now. But I still think the tag team one is a little bit cooler. So, that wasn't bad, and I think Quiet Storm winning was a little bit of a surprise. But, yeah, it's just like, it was boring. And, you don't want a match with that much stuff happening to be boring. I think it's interesting that all these guys who are still very green, they decide to keep putting them in, and they do for a lot of ROH's run, keep putting them in these big, complicated multi-man matches, because I feel like those are harder than singles matches where you could just do something a little bit more basic and tell a story. So I feel like you're asking these guys to do a lot of heavy lifting by making those matches seem coordinated and smooth.
Yeah, it just feels like they got very, like, from show one, pigeonholed as, we kind of just want to have a crazy multi-man thing on most shows, and these are going to be our guys that do it regardless of maybe how good they are at doing it, some aspects of it. It's kind of like, this is the role we have slotted for you guys. I agree about the Spanish Fly. I think it's just cooler when three guys do it, because it takes more coordination for three guys to do something than two. And the Spanish Fly, really, I remember around this time period, was kind of like the it move, although I think the Cop Killer, when we're talking about moves that happened on the show, was pretty big too. But I just remember the Spanish Fly was one of those moves where you heard it described and was like, okay, I got to hear this. I got to see this, because people keep telling me how crazy it was. And even though it seems a little more commonplace now, still a really cool move. I think the one other thing about this match that I got to bring up is a couple times the announcers and the wrestlers kind of almost acted like this was a six-man tag. A six-man tag instead of an elimination match where there could only be one winner. There's a couple times where wrestlers or the commentary act like someone just stabbed someone in the back for pinning someone or attacking someone, when, it was a match where it's an elimination match. It's going to come down to one guy. And so the idea of, red teams with the SAT sometimes, and one of the SAT just hit red, like, it's a six-man elimination match. Like, what do you expect?
Yeah, I agree. The commentary was not always particularly logical, and we'll get to some more stuff like that with that later.
Yeah. So I think that sums up that match pretty well, probably. And next we're getting our third squash match of the show, which is Prince Nana versus Eric the Towel Boy Tuttle. And it starts it was kind of a cool shot, at least, where it starts with, we see Prince Nana talking to Rob Feinstein, the original owner of Ring of Honor. This is the first on-camera appearance of him officially, although if you watch the show, I noticed earlier in the show, you could kind of see him hanging out at the back of the gym. But, Nana asks Rob to find him an opponent. He goes in the basement where Eric the Towel Boy's pulling weights. Haha, he's skinny and trying to build weights. And then the match the camera kind of follows Eric behind as he walks through the curtain into the ring, which I felt was like kind of a cool shot for such a crappy squash. And then Prince Nana wins in about a minute. Yeah,
and it was like, what he won with was a cool move. It was sort of like, it felt like a double arm, like belly to belly. I've seen it described as a double arm DDT, where he just lifts him like straight up in the air, and then he kind of comes down like on like almost like the top or like the back of his head.
Yeah.
So as far as squashes go, it was not bad, honestly, but it's still just like, it just seems like the mission statement of this promotion did not match what they were presenting at all.
Yeah, again, the thing Gabe always stresses, we talked about a bit about this on the List 'em and Learn, is this is supposed to, this is a product that is, other than the live ticket sales, it lives or dies on DVD and, at this point, VHS sales. That's all that's bringing in the money. And angles don't sell tapes, interviews don't sell tapes, matches sell tapes, and yet the whole undercard of the show is basically short matches, a little bit of angle work, and squashes.
Maybe it was just that they did not have the guys to do the matches yet. Like, I guess that's might be what, like, the reason behind this. But I do wonder, though, because, ROH changes, gradually over the years in a lot of different points. But I wonder how much of the early era was Feinstein, Doug Gentry, and Gabe. Like, I wonder, like, who came up with what, and like what the push and pull in the back was, as far as like what they were going to do on the show, and who really got to say the most, and like what, it's just I don't know if that's ever really been talked about, but like who was the one pushing which thing.
Yeah, it's because obviously the company does evolve, no pun intended, quite a bit through the first few years. And it could just be a matter of, growing pains. You might set out to do something but not really know how to implement it. Or it really might be, maybe Rob or Doug, the other people that were kind of the big masterminds behind our video and behind this company creatively. maybe they had more of an influence. I honestly don't know.
Yeah, and just like to clarify, because I don't know if we like said it quite clearly. So Rob Feinstein, who owned RF Video, he was the owner of Ring of Honor. Doug Gentry was sort of his right hand man in RF Video, and like very important person behind the scenes in ROH. And Sapolsky, who was Paul Heyman's kind of like almost like his protege.
Yeah.
In ECW, started working for RF Video once ECW went out of business, and he became like his title in ROH was the Booker. Like he was the Booker from the beginning. So, and he would be the guy that would go on like Wrestling Observer Radio, Wrestling Observer Live at the time, and plug ROH to Meltzer and all that stuff. So he was always sort of like the public face of Ring of Honor in terms of promoting it and stuff. But things definitely were different when Feinstein and Gentry were still part of the company than they became after they left. So this clearly wasn't Gabe's pure vision at the time. There was definitely a lot of influence by Feinstein, but I'm still not sure what was what.
Yeah, and I think it's good. That's one thing we forgot. Bad on me to not kind of introduce kind of the major players of Ring of Honor earlier when we were doing the background, and I think you summed them up really well. I guess we should probably. I feel like we don't know enough about Doug Gentry, but I think that's a common thing because I know when Voices of Wrestling did the Honor Roll project where they also let people vote in addition to the top 50 Ring of Honor wrestlers. They had a separate list for kind of the non-wrestlers in Ring of Honor history, and I'm pretty sure Gabe remarked publicly that he felt that Doug should have been ranked higher in the non-wrestlers for his importance to the company. And I know I've heard some people put it as that Doug is kind of responsible for Ring of Honor being alive today because he was kind of the connection that Rob had to Kerry Silken, who ended up backing the company for many, many years and actually saved it kind of from going out of business about a year after its initial beginnings.
Yeah, and we should mention Doug Gentry died, very tragically young. In I think 2007.
I believe it was an infection that spread to his heart, I think, and he died of complications of that.
Yeah, so that's why maybe you don't hear as much about him, although he had kind of faded into the background very quickly after the Feinstein scandal, which we'll, I guess, talk about however many years down the road when we get to that era. But yeah, it's definitely possible that he should be ranked higher, but the thing is, there's really no way for us to know what exactly he did and didn't do. That it never really has been talked about. I would love to hear like a shoot interview with Sapolsky, where he really like just goes into the early years of ROH and like this is how things went and this is how things like progressed and this is who thought of what and who wanted to do what. As a ROH fan, I'm fascinated by that, but that information is not really out there.
Yeah, he has done some shoot interviews, but it's always focused more on the era kind of post-Rob. Uh-huh. So I don't know if we'll ever get that kind of stuff. I would be really fascinated into that stuff too. So we're getting deeper into the card. Our next match is something a little bit different. It is a tag match between 4 Texas Wrestling Academy students. Texas Wrestling Academy was Shawn Michaels and Rudy Boy Gonzalez's famous kind of school that produced Bryan Danielson, Spanky, who you would know as Brian Kendrick now, Michael Shane. And this match is Spanky and, I forgot how to pronounce it, Aikiga Loa. I'll just call him Loa from here on out, versus Michael Shane and Oz. And the stipulation
that one's hard to pronounce too.
Yeah, Oz. Anyway, the stipulation we're told for this match is whoever gets the pin gets a Ring of Honor contract. And that's, to me, is always a little weird when you have a stipulation for a tag match that only one person gets, because
Gargiulo pointed that out. He was like, this is illogical, basically. And I think it's silly for the announcer to point out how stupid their stipulation was.
Yeah, I actually, this is one of the only times I have a little bit of sympathy for him, because I feel it's like kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. I will note the wrestlers do not wrestle the match to that stip. No partner ever gets mad at his partner for trying to pin. No one ever tries to break up their partner's pins. They just wrestle it like a straight up tag, even though if your partner gets the pin here, they're getting the big benefit and you're not getting anything. In fact, when spoiler Spanky gets the pin at the end, Loa just like shakes his hand afterwards, like, hey, cool. So the other thing to note here is that I don't know if this is true or not. I assume it's true. The announcers talk about how these Texas Wrestling Academy boys did a 26-hour road trip from San Antonio to Philly to work this show, and that Loa has 3 or 4 herniated discs in his back and had to suffer through that through the drive.
Yeah, they talk about that a lot. And you could it sounds like it was probably true because he was not. He seemed to be moving very awkwardly the entire time.
Yes, he was clear. It's hard to judge him because of that. I think it's safe to say he was clearly the worst guy in this match. He was very much punch, kick, slam, elbow drop. He moved kind of gingerly at some points. He took one kind of really gnarly looking bump where I think Oz goes to throw him over the ropes, and it's one of those moments where Loa basically just has to bump himself over the rope, and he lands really hard on his lower back or tailbone, which probably can't feel good if he really does have 3 or 4 herniated discs. But this is a match. Oh, one other thing. We're also told in this match that I love this because it's so indie, but I actually do like this, where we're told not only does the winner get a Ring of Honor contract, but they get trans, man.
Yeah.
You win this match, you get plane tickets from now on. Like, it's such an indie thing to brag about. You don't have to drive if you win this match. But I have to imagine if you're an indie wrestler, like, if you follow indie wrestling, you know that's a real benefit. Like,
yeah, I mean, it makes it realistic, which is good.
It is still something you would only see. You're never going to see that in mainstream wrestling, where he doesn't have to drive with 3 other guys for 26 hours if he wins this match.
And by the way, we were talking about how like ROH did, up until the main event, didn't really feature a long, good wrestling match. Well, they had their opportunity right here with Spanky and Michael Shane, and I don't know like why they had to throw in these other 2 guys in their match. It seems like a big waste to Spanky because we'll get to the main event, like those are like the 3 like indie stars of the moment. But Spanky was also considered among that like elite level of top indie guys at the time. He was known for having great matches with American Dragon and stuff, and this seems like a big waste of him to have him in this tag match with guys that were clearly not even close to his level. And, when Michael Shane and Spanky were wrestling one-on-one, it was by far the crispest wrestling on the show so far. So, like, I don't know why they just didn't have those 2 guys just go out and have a real match.
Yeah, I could only assume that maybe, I don't know, I would think that maybe Rudy Boy or somebody maybe was pushing the, hey, could we get some of these other, I know you like Spanky and Michael Shane, but could we get these other guys a look? I think if that's the case, maybe it's partly due to Loa's injury. Oz doesn't work that much of this match and doesn't really make an impression. Loa doesn't make really a positive impression. Like you said, this match is by far it's at its best when it's Spanky versus Michael Shane. And I would say Spanky, other than of people that wrestled on this show, other than the top 2 matches, which are the last 2 matches coming up, he is by far the most polished, smooth, professional worker on the entire card.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it was and I'll say even more, the best on the best wrestler on the entire card, other than those guys. Yeah,
and luckily he does work a fair amount of this match. This match isn't great or anything, but it's a watchable 10-minute tag match.
I really noticed the annoyingness of the commentators in this one because I was just like looking and watching for how long they spent without calling any moves. Like they would just like talk back and forth to each other about like these guys need to travel and they want to get this and that, and it's just like that you go like a good like 2 or 3 minutes without them actually calling anything that happens in the ring, and it's just like, yeah, that kind of says it all right there.
And Gargiulo, like I wrote in my little review of this match, I wrote Loa's ruining this match, but it's because whenever he's in the ring, Gargiulo cannot talk about anything but the herniated discs in his back. And I would say almost every move Loa does, whether it's offense or defense, if it involves anything close to Loa's back, Gargiulo has to talk about how it's going to hurt his back. Yet Loa doesn't really sell his back in the match. Like, it becomes so distracting where everything he does, Gargiulo has to relate it to the back somehow.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like clearly like real information that Gargiulo knew, but it wasn't like they were working the match in that way, where it was a
No,
thing. Gargiulo, and also there's a couple things, other things I noticed about the commentary. Well, one thing, by the way, Loa. One thing he did do well, he had some very good chops. I noticed that. Like his chops were hard and they were loud and they seemed to hurt. But one thing I did notice about him, Carino never said his name. He just kept calling him the Big Hawaiian, to the point where I'm pretty sure that Carino just like didn't bother to pay attention to what his name was, like because he never said it once. He just said the Big Hawaiian, the Big Hawaiian, the Big Hawaiian. And the other thing was Gargiulo when he was talking about Michael Shane, because Michael Shane, Matt Bentley is I guess Shawn Michaels' is real life cousin, and there's definitely a facial resemblance there. He would talk about how like that Michael Shane like his cousin he uses high aerial moves as a defense. Most guys use it as an offense, but HBK used to use it as a defense. And I was trying to figure out what he meant by that. Like if he was just like making shit up, or like is that if there's actually something to that. Like, do you think that was actually a thing that Shawn Michaels did, where he used aerial moves as a defense?
no. I mean, what are even the moves that are Shawn's most known for from the top? Like the flying elbow drop, which isn't a defensive move.
I guess the moonsault, you could say, like he's like someone whips him into the ropes and he doesn't, or like he's on the ropes and someone's running at him and he does a quick moonsault. I guess maybe that. I'm trying to think about it because I don't know like what that even means. Using aerial moves as a defense.
I noticed that too. It was just and again, another weird comment from a pretty poor night of commentary.
Yeah.
But it's weird. We haven't said too much about the match itself. But again, it was just the Spanky and Michael Shane segments were fairly good. And nothing was other than Loa looking a little bit rough sometimes was really too bad. But this isn't a match that, I mean, I don't think Oz or Loa gets another booking after this. Shane and Spanky obviously do. And I do feel kind of bad whenever people talk about Michael Shane, like the commentary talking about Michael Shane being Shawn Michaels' cousin, because, I mean, I don't think Michael Shane was ever, I wouldn't call him a great talent by any means, but I do think he is a guy that name and recognition saddled him far more than it helped, because he even, like you said, he kind of resembles him. He kind of works a little bit like the cousin of Shawn Michaels would work, you would think. And it just, rather than being his own thing, where if you look at the kind of two guys from that same school that left him in the dust, Spanky definitely has some Shawn Michael-esque qualities, but he kind of has this goofiness that makes it kind of completely his own thing. And obviously Bryan Danielson, a completely different style in a lot of ways. But Michael Shane, you watch him, and he's a perfectly serviceable, solid wrestler who just, you're constantly told who he's from, who his classmates were, and he never lives up to that.
Well, it's one thing that TNA did a little better because they never really did that, right, with Michael Shane. They never went over the top talking about Shawn Michaels, and they let him start using his real name, Matt Bentley. Unfortunately, the Bentley bounce did not make him a superstar.
It's no Shara Shuffle.
Of all the wrestlers in history to get their own dance named after them, you would not expect it to be Michael Shane.
That's the crazy thing. What must you think when you're coming up and you're kind of good looking and you're going, man, I'm Shawn Michaels' cousin, and then years later you're in TNA and you're going, I'm doing the Bentley bounce. What a strange road this life has taken me to. I don't know, but. Perfectly serviceable match. I keep saying that over and over, but it really was. I feel like the kind of whenever you see kind of a group of students work a big new promotion, you usually go balls to the wall, kind of trying to make an impression to get future bookings. I don't feel like they really did that here. I feel they just kind of worked the standard tag with Shane and Spanky working pretty hard.
Fairly directionless though, just like all the other matches.
Yeah, there's not much of a story, not much, no real hot tag sequence. Not that every tag match needs to have that, but there wasn't. Again, it was just four guys filling time adequately, which was kind of the story of the undercard, which was squashes and guys filling time to adequate results.
Yep. Spanky obviously won. I think that's not
Yes.
surprising to anybody. He got the pin.
Yeah. And even another weird thing is, obviously, Michael Shane would be back too, even though this whole match was built around, well, one guy wins and gets a contract. But, I mean, I guess we can move on to, we get another backstage segment where Mikey Whipwreck has Super Crazy, his old friend, act as a translator to inform all the guys in the Ultimate Aerial Elimination match that they'll be working a three-way tag the next month, which is, for me, reminds me of, like, when Domino's started selling sub sandwiches and you realized it was just all the old ingredients inside a bun that they put on the pizza. That's definitely what this felt like, which was, hey, you know this match where all six guys just did crazy stuff? Next month, they're all going to do crazy stuff in the ring together again. Like, and it was also funny that he needed a translator when he, I guess, this, you know, the idea is that he trained pretty much all of them, but he still apparently did not know Spanish.
Yeah, that is interesting, actually, now that you mention it. Of course, then you have the H.C. Loke segment where he just says fuck a lot.
Yes, where he's on the phone to a mystery person, which will turn out to be Tony DeVito for the Carnage crew. And
wasn't it supposed to be someone else at first, and then that match didn't make the DVD or something?
It was. When I was researching, I forget who, we'll have to look it up for that show, but I think there was a match where the Carnage crew was originally supposed to be H.C. Loke and somebody else, and for whatever reason it didn't work out, and then DeVito comes in and becomes the real tag partner.
And the rest is history.
Yes, the most legendary part.
Yeah, quote H.C. Loke, fuck the Extreme official, bro. He's mad that they made him ref in ROH. He's like, he should be a wrestler. He shouldn't have to pay his dues anymore.
Yeah, he's done that enough. And again, kind of goofy, but
I think this was a good angle. I thought it was good. Like, just good booking.
And again, something that indies don't do enough of these days, which is just have a hook to go buy the next show. Not that this is something that's gonna sell a DVD on its own, but at least there's something that you're thinking about for the next show, like what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And so next we go to the first half of what I'd say is a double main event, which is Eddie Guerrero versus Super Crazy for the IWA Intercontinental title match. Now,
it was vacant, right? Like, they did not have a champion, right?
Looking online, this was to decide the first ever IWA Intercontinental title match. I couldn't find out in my limited research why the first IWA Intercontinental champion was being decided in Ring of Honor rather than in Puerto Rico, but they even mentioned at one point that the match is being filmed to be airing on Puerto Rican TV for IWA. I don't know why they didn't book that. But I don't know why they didn't book that match in IWA, but it happens here. And obviously this is during a time when Eddie Guerrero had been fired for, I think, drunk driving after he had already had a rehab stint during his WWE time. And this was kind of this short few-month period where he worked the U.S. Indies. And Super Crazy, obviously, is ECW mainstay, has those ECW connections to the RF video people running Ring of Honor. And when you see the ring introductions, Eddie clearly gets the biggest reaction, one of the biggest reactions of the night. Crowd is super pumped to see him. The reaction made me think that he was probably the reason why a bunch of these people bought tickets, even though he worked other indies. I know he worked IWA Mid-South against CM Punk, but I have to think, just based on the reaction, that he was a big part of the show.
His character was different than what I was used to, because he didn't crack a smile the entire time he was on camera in the show. He just had this angry, serious, snarl on his face. In the match, in his post-match promo, I'd never really seen him kind of use that persona, and I don't know what he was going for, but it was, I don't know, it just stood out to me.
The craziest thing is he comes right out, it starts right from his ring entrance where he comes through the curtain where he has that kind of snarl and that game face. And it's so crazy because his theme music is Smooth by by Santana and Rob Thomas. So it's this weird combination of the most intense guy and fucking Smooth is playing.
Yeah, it's weird. But like you said, the crowd was nuts for this.
and the announcers were putting it over huge as this dream match. Gargiulo was like, there was an RF Video Shoot interview where Guerrero said that Super Crazy would be a dream opponent, so ROH booked the match. And their wrestling was good. But I'd say, considering how much they hyped it up, I thought the match was a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, definitely. Um, the other thing I actually, before I get into the match, I kind of appreciated was Carino brings up this is a first-time match, and Gargiulo actually corrects him and says, no, they've already wrestled once in Puerto Rico. And for some reason, I just appreciate that little bit of honesty that you didn't need, because it's so rare in wrestling to actually say, no, like, this isn't a first-time dream match, this is a second-time dream match.
The announcers were absolutely at their best in this match, I would say.
Yeah, they were definitely, I would agree with that. And the other thing I would agree with, while I'm on my biggest streak of agreeing with you, this was a pretty, this was not a bad match, but this was easily the most disappointing match of the night, where near the very end of the show, after this match in the main event, Eddie Guerrero gives an interview about how he needs to refine the eye of the tiger and needs to get that hunger back because Ring of Honor is full of hungry young talent. And it's funny he says that, because if you watch this match, his performance is completely devoid of hunger. So maybe he was even reflecting on that, where it's a pretty short match. It's 10 minutes, and it's very much I'm doing just enough to get by. I'm not ripping these people off, but I'm going to do just enough to pass through this match. Going to give them the hits at the end, and we're going to go home. And it's a 10-minute match with 3 rest holds from Eddie. Eddie, who kind of controls the match, keeps kind of grounding the match to the point where Gargiulo and Carino talk about how methodical it was. And it's almost like even you can sense a little bit of disappointment even from them, because at one point they start talking about, see, when these guys finally kick it into high gear, things are picking up. And then you realize they're saying that, but it's 8 minutes into a 10-minute match. So it's not like they'll go on this crazy end run. They do have a kind of a hot final 2 minutes, but it was not a bad match. It was probably the second.
Yeah, second best match on the show. It was a good match, I would say.
Yeah, and they did just enough. I felt like Eddie kind of leads the match. You can tell and controls it, but I feel like when he kind of spaced out Super Crazy's offense, and it made Super Crazy look real good, because I thought Super Crazy's offense looked great, but most of the match is kind of Eddie kind of grounding things and slowly picking it up. He breaks out a brainbuster on the floor fairly early, though, which seemed kind of, for how measured the rest of the match was, kind of crazy, and it looked great, but
the announcers didn't really even sell it like a big deal. They were just like, oh, look, Eddie really is acting serious here, but no one's like, oh my god, brainbuster on the floor.
Yeah, and like, again, this is an unprotected gym floor, and so you would think you should react to it a bit, and it doesn't get the reaction it deserves. But yeah, just a 10-minute match, and I guess what we have to remember is nowadays indie wrestling is kind of seen as this place where you kind of are going to indies. Some guys are still going just for a buck and to get by, doing as little as possible. But for a lot of guys now in indies, we're in Cody Rhodeses and Drew Galloways and guys like that, where the indies are where they kind of have to reprove themselves and rediscover their love of wrestling. Before kind of the first indie boom, that wasn't how veterans saw the indies. It was, well, my other opportunities are gone, but I still want to wrestle. I'm going to get by doing just enough, and these fans are going to be happy kind of seeing me play my greatest hits, and that's all I need to do. And that was very much what this performance was.
Yeah, it was interesting that the announcers at one point referred to Super Crazy as an up-and-comer, since, at least in America, I think his most noteworthy days were behind him. But yeah, and like I said, the offense was good. I did think it was funny because like there was a little bit of a storyline where Eddie Guerrero was working Super Crazy's back, and Gargiulo was like, "Oh, Eddie always has really good psychology," and it's just like, well, in kayfabe terms, that's not psychology, right? That's just like you're trying to win by beating up an opponent. So I thought that was funny, but the finish was pretty abrupt. Eddie hit a lot of good moves at the end. Good backbreaker, good power bomb that Super Crazy kicks out of. But it ended just with like Eddie goes to the frog splash, he rolls through because Super Crazy moves, goes for a tilt-a-whirl backbreaker, roll up, and it was like the first really big pin attempt by Super Crazy, and he won. So it was just like it was very quick, like yeah, like a decent Raw match, like kind of like that Xavier match, only obviously a lot better than that.
Yeah, again, second best match on the show, but I have to say, if I had bought this DVD or gone to the show for Super Crazy versus Eddie Guerrero, I would have been pretty disappointed.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess you know, luckily, you have something more to come.
Yes, we have the main event, which is the match that sold the show. It's sold and stole. Low Key versus Bryan Danielson versus
Well,
Christopher Daniels.
versus American Dragon. He was not yet going by Bryan Danielson.
Okay, versus the American Dragon. And this is by far the best match on the show. Needless to say, this was the only match that I would say was great on the show, or even approaching great. And if Ring of Honor was a company that needed matches to sell shows, this is a match that could sell a show at this point in Ring of Honor history. It's 20 minutes, and what I was struck by watching it after all these years is how kind of they're really going for it in a way of they're not doing a ton of convoluted three-way spots that triple threat matches can fall into. There's a few, but they're kind of spaced out.
And they're really good, the ones they do.
Yeah, those are the highlights, I would say, of the match and the show, but they really make them count. And at the same time, there's another trope three ways can fall into, which is one guy's going to get hurt and sell for 100 years, while the other two have like an extended singles match. So that way we don't have to think about the problems of working a three-way match. That doesn't really happen much either. What more just happens is two guys do a quick little sequence. As soon as one bumps and kind of is down, the other one jumps in. And there's very much kind of a very quick pace that really works for me about that. And even there's a surprising number of submission attempts in this match. And every time there's a submission attempt, it gets broken up by the third guy that's not involved really quickly. Like, there's kind of an urgency to it that's sometimes missing in three-way matches. Like, it doesn't feel like they're constrained by it being a three-way. Like, they're still doing what they want to do.
Yeah, and oh my God, were Low Key and Dragon, like their offense was so much smoother and tighter than everyone else on the show. It's just so immediately apparent that these are like two, not just great wrestlers for like their experience level, but like two guys that are like doing something completely revolutionary in their wrestling, at least by American standards. Like these were like basically like what Dragon was 20, Low Key was like 21, 22, and they were on a different level of not only guys on this show, but guys in the WWF, guys who had been in WCW, just in terms of like the tightness of what they were doing, the smoothness of their offense, the speed at which they were doing things. Like they were on like a whole other planet. And I think they proved that they really were that good over those many years that came after.
And American Dragon and Low Key, I was listening to an episode of Between the Sheets podcast the other day where Phil Schneider was talking about kind of indies from this era and talking about how American Dragon and Low Key, that was one of the first kind of big indie touring matches where you would go out of your way to see them whenever they worked each other. And he made a point of how, as someone who watched indies live back then, a lot of indies didn't have a lot of stiffness to them. That wasn't a big element of it. And he said they were just stiffer on another level. And even on the show where you have other wrestlers like the Hit Squad talking about things being hard-hitting, Low Key and Dragon are clearly just on another level in terms of just how hard they're willing to kick and hit, how snug and just how tight everything looks.
Yeah, it's amazing. And like this match, it had a little bit of a storyline. It's not like it like really built and built and built. I think it was fairly like exciting throughout. There really weren't any lulls, but there also wasn't like this incredible crescendo either. So it's not like the best match in ROH history, but in terms of like a mission statement of like the quality of action and the quality of execution that the top ROH matches are going to have, it was pretty incredible. I mean, I'm sure you were planning on going through some of the spots, but just some of like the ones that stood out to me, like Dragon has Daniel's leg like grapevine and almost like a like a back like almost like a Mutalog sort of scenario where he like bends back and like grapevines the arms in like a chicken wing. But like while he's doing that, Low-key like starts attacking him, and they just start like fighting while Daniels' leg is wrapped up in Dragon's, and like Dragon hits a Northern Lights suplex on Low-key while he still has Daniel's leg locked, trapped up, and then like he kind of spins it around like and goes underneath into like another kind of like weird submission, and the crowd goes nuts for that. And Carino is like, "What's Dragon gonna be like when he's a 10-year veteran?" And it was like, "Okay, well that's the smartest thing Carino said in the entire thing." And then he says this is the greatest pro wrestling show he's ever seen, and I was like, I feel like I've seen a lot with Carino on them that were better overall, but that's another story. Then they do the "That's not how you do it" spot where they're both like taking turns kicking Daniels in the back, and they stole that spot a few years later for the Daniels versus Styles versus Samoa Joe famous three-way from TNA. But I think this one ends in a better way because they're like sandwich kicking Daniels, and Daniels moves out of the way, and they both kick each other in the shins, which was I think a pretty intense way to end that spot.
Hmm.
Then Dragon does like the low key head kicks, like the ones where like the guy's on his knees and just like rapid fire kicks to the head. I guess they're like more like Kawada style head kicks.
Yeah.
And his are not as good as low keys. I will say that. It's the one thing that Dragon did that wasn't super great.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It was Loki does them to him earlier in the match, and so Dragon's trying to kind of one up him, and it's something he probably shouldn't have tried because I guess it's a move you just have to have a lot of confidence and control on because those little Kawada kicks where you're basically doing these repeated little kicks right to the head. If you don't do it just right, it looks pretty bad if you're trying to be safe. And yeah, that's like you said, that's probably the one kind of rough spot in the entire match. But you covered a lot of the big spots. I think I'll point out that even though obviously I think you and I are bigger fans of Low Key and American Dragon than Christopher Daniels, and while I think Low Key and American Dragon were kind of in some ways the stars of the match, I think Christopher Daniels was kind of the glue that held it together because he was willing to kind of be the stooge for this match, be the guy who's kind of, he really put over how badass Dragon and Key were because there's a lot of the key spots in the match, like the kicking spots and the submission spots, are kind of built around basically Key and Dragon are the two aces that are kind of having a competition of who can kick Christopher Daniels' ass the best. And I think it kind of sums up who Christopher Daniels is, where he knows his role and he's giving enough to kind of, he's going to be that kind of guy. He'll let them kind of, you watch this match and you come away thinking Dragon and Key are the top two guys in the company, and Daniels is going to have to be the crafty heel that cheats or schemes to find his way in there. And that's exactly what it needed to be worked as.
Yeah. Daniels, I mean, he's such a pro. And he not only was able to really do all the things he needed to do to get the two other guys over, but he also added like some color and personality to the match, because that was one thing that the other two guys were, I think, lacking at the time. Their work was unbelievable, but they were not exactly flashy personalities. I think if you look closely, if you squint a little bit, you could see American Dragon's charisma in there, but it wasn't nearly as obvious as it became. He very stone faced, very just like, I am going to do these moves. And I think Low Key was always like Mr. like intense and super self serious. So I think what Daniels also brought to the match was fun, like this sense of like, this is wrestling, this is fun, we're characters, we're wrestlers, we're gonna actually like entertain you besides just like put on this like clinic of intense athleticism.
Mm-hmm. The best comedic moments in the whole match are because of the whole night are because of Christopher Daniels, and he just gives Dragon and Key don't really have much of a personality at that point other than we're both really great kind of intense wrestlers that can hit hard. And so Daniels gives them something contrasting that they can play off of. If it was just another guy with that same kind of vibe, I don't think the match would be as good.
Yeah, I agree with that. And obviously, Low Key and Dragon, they're fine with just the two of them, but it's a different thing. It's and we'll see that on the next review that we do.
And so overall, I would say this is a match that still really holds up.
One of the best three-way matches
ever. I would say it's in that upper echelon of, I'd say, probably a top 5 three-way as far as ones that I've seen.
I would agree that's probably top 5 still for me. And looking at Cage Match, I saw Dave Meltzer, I guess at the time, give it 4.5. I think that's still a pretty fair rating. I think it's still, there are matches that happened years and years ago that might be 4.5, and then you come back to them, they might be like 3.5. I think this holds up largely as whatever you would think about it then is kind of what you would think about it now. I think there's enough humor and a little bit of character work, and it just is a really well worked match that it holds up.
I mean, the athleticism of it holds up as well. Like, you don't see too many like indie guys now that are so clearly good and cutting edge the way American Dragon and Low Key were in 2002. And then of course you have like the veteran kind of like psychological working that Daniel's added to it. So I think it holds up great. I could even like I wouldn't myself, but if someone wanted to say this was like a 5-star match just based on the work, but also based on the historical significance, because we talked about this show. This show without this match was not a particularly good show, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Where do you think this company would have gone if they didn't have a match like this to end the show?
Nowhere.
Yeah,
they would have probably had another show, but like this is what sold them. Like these Low Key in particular, but like these combinations of guys.
Like they needed these guys to hit a home run the way the show had been constructed, and the way the show turned out. And I think it's good to point out Gabe or whoever did it made a really smart choice making these guys the main event, because nothing was going to follow it. And I think it really put over, no, these guys are what you should be focusing on. Even if you came here, if you bought the tape or came to the show for Eddie against Super Crazy, like, these are the guys you should keep coming back for. This is the future, I think it worked even better than if they had, say, done a show where it was Eddie versus Low Key and Super Crazy versus Dragon. I think this works better because I think it kind of gives off the vibe of, like, these three don't need anyone to put them over. They don't need the endorsement of veterans. They don't need to semi-main event for veterans. They're already the future right now.
Yeah, this match made the company. And, if we're going to, like, talk about booking decisions, yeah, like you said, making this match the main event and, giving it the time and, just having the trust in the guys, like, that's a great booking decision right there, and clearly, possibly the most important one they ever did, because they, this event happened. It got buzz, legitimately got real good buzz. Meltzer wrote about it, all that stuff, and 15 years later, the company is still a thing with an incredible legacy. So, and we're doing this podcast, and if you have us doing a podcast about you 15 years later, you did something right.
Yeah. I don't do podcasts for anything unless Matt says, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast?" And I says, "Yes."
It's a tough road to hoe, but I managed to get it done by simply asking once.
Yeah, but so great match, and even that visual, that one of those final spots. It's not the very final spot, but Dragon has Daniels in the cattle mutilation, and Low Key just crushes them with a Phoenix Splash. That still is a great spot even today. It looks fantastic. And the crowd is hotter for this than anything else on the show, other than maybe Eddie's ring introduction gets as big as a reaction as their key spots here.
Yeah.
But after the match is done, where Key wins, he hits the Key Crusher on Daniels to win. The crowd is, we get more Ring of Honor chants, not ROH chants. We get the first ever, I think, Match of the Year chant. The crowd is going nuts. I think Carino calls it the best match he's ever seen, which I don't know if I would go that far, but it's the first time of the night that maybe his kind of hyperbolic statements actually seem a little bit justified.
Yeah.
And again, it was, I don't know if we can overstate the importance of, it saved the show in a lot of ways. It gave people a reason to buy the DVD. And it set the right message the company needed. There were so many things on the show where what they were telling you Ring of Honor was and what they were showing you Ring of Honor weren't the same thing. And this match finally kind of lined up with what the talk was.
I would agree with that. It's finally like the commentators were so annoying with their hype the entire show, and honestly they were annoying with their hype during this match too. Like it was too much, but at least the wrestlers put in the work to actually match what the announcers were saying.
Yeah. And then we get a little post-match in-ring thing where all three take turns getting on the mic. Daniel says that he could beat either guy in singles matches. Dragon points out that Low-Ki didn't pin him, so...
Yeah, and I will say this, because, Danielson, or Dragon, he had a reputation for years of being like just like a Dean Malenko type wrestler, like, not a great promo. His delivery in his short promo was better than the delivery of most of the guys on the show. I would say, including Low-Ki, honestly. Like, he was already, like, not terrible on promos.
Yeah, he was never bad, especially whenever the more he was just himself and not having to really spit out someone else's ideas, like, if they were really involved, the more he could just be kind of to the point Bryan Danielson, I think the more perfectly good he seemed. And we get this little angle that, Low-Ki decides, hey, if, Danielson, if Dragon, you want to face me, and Danielson, you think you could beat both of us, let's have a round-robin challenge the next month, Boom, you got your next show right there, 3 matches instead of 1. And again, another really smart thing, I'm not the hugest fan of 3-ways, but it really works well to be able to go, hey, if you like this match, we're basically going to, like, multiply it by 3 on the next show if you come back.
Yeah, it's a smart move, and, we'll talk about how well it worked pretty soon.
Yeah, and other than that, we get a little Eddie Guerrero.
Did we mention that Daniels would not shake hands?
Oh yeah,
because that was like the big angle on the show, right? Because everyone followed the code of honor except for Daniels, and that was like I remember when Sapolsky was on Wrestling Observer Live, back in the back a couple months after this. And, like, that was, like, something that he was really proud of. Like, just like, we made it so easy to make a heel because everyone shook hands, but then Daniels didn't, and that immediately turned him heel. And, Daniels became the top heel in the company for the first, like, couple of years. So that was a big angle for them.
Yeah, and, they built... I feel like maybe a few more guys on the show could have really emphasized, and the announcers could have emphasized the handshake a bit more. I feel like they would do that in later shows, but seeing as how the whole kind of show was building up to... Daniels, doing the old, I'm going to pretend I'm going to shake your hands and then, like, smooth over my non-existent hair as I leave. I feel that might have worked a little bit better if they had really emphasized even more the rest of the night how, like, look, everyone has to shake hands. But, yeah, it does immediately establish him as the very kind of first heel in Ring of Honor other than the concept of homosexuality. And...
God...
That's the number 1 heel, but Daniels is a strong number 2, and and he's the guy that has the chops to pull it off. You can tell just by his charisma. And he has a little bit of a background in acting. I don't think there's many other guys in the company that could have kind of pulled off what they're going to ask him to do for the next year.
Yeah, and he did a great job.
And from there, we get the little Eddie Guerrero promo where...
he still looks very angry.
Yes, we kind of talked about before, but he talks about how, either he's slipping or, he's just got to step his game up again. Ring of Honor's full of hungry young talent, and he wants to come back, which he does for exactly 1 show because WWF quickly re-signs him.
And I realize in my notes it's Eddie in this promo who refers to Super Crazy as an up-and-coming star, not the commentators.
I think both of them might have, and I think Super Crazy was 28 or 29 at this point, so not old, but wasn't a rookie either, and everyone seemed to be kind of acting like he was going to be the next big thing when he was kind of already established as a wrestler in the U.S.
Yeah, like I said, his career in the U.S. had already peaked by this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we close out with a little highlight video, and we're told to come back next month for the Round Robin Challenge, which we will.
Another techno highlight video, this time of just everything that we just saw. I'm glad they stopped doing these after the first year or so.
Only like 11, 12 more of these to go.
Yeah.
That'll be what ends this podcast. So, summing up the show, I think there's two ways you can look at the show from recommending it to people nowadays. I think if you are just really interested in seeing what some big stars like Danielson looked like and Kendrick looked like when they were young, this is an interesting curiosity. I think if you're a fan of modern indie wrestling and kind of want to see how far it's changed in a lot of ways, I think this is an interesting curiosity. I think if you are not interested in any of that kind of historical stuff and you just want to watch a show for good wrestling, it's a very tricky sell because there's one really good match, but in today's world where wrestling is so plentiful, I don't know if I can recommend hunting down this DVD on eBay for that one match.
Yeah, I would say, it's like the first WrestleMania, right? It wasn't a good show, but it's historic, so it might be worth watching. But if that doesn't really matter to you, yeah, no, don't watch the show. Just find a video of the main event. The main event is definitely worth watching. That's like a great match and also historic. So, like I said, that main event, I saw that maybe like a year after it happened, long before I really got into ROH. It was just like a random video on the internet. But the full show, I only watched when I became like a completist, and it's not very good. It's just, and the opening angle I think is so disgusting that I think it should be wiped from history. That's how bad I think it was, and offensive. But if you can, again, if you care about ROH, it's definitely, I'd say you should watch the first show. I mean, that's just to know where it was, and the main event is absolutely a must see if you're a fan of any of those guys or of that kind of wrestling in any way.
Yeah. Yes. If you can find a way to watch just that match, wink, wink, it's worth going out of your way to see that match. But that should be it. One thing I'm going to bring up for this first episode is I have a blog where I review wrestling, and that is at workthehands.wordpress.com, no spaces. And what I am going to do is I'm going to post reviews of each of these shows after the episodes go up, and the reviews are going to be largely what I've already talked about here, since I'm using the reviews and notes. So I would say if you actually are listening to this podcast, you don't really necessarily need to go there and read the reviews, but if for some reason you ever want to go back and see it in the printed word, it's there. If you want to send us an email, maybe we'll eventually set up a podcast email, but for now, if you want to go to workthehands@gmail.com with any questions or ideas or anything, open to listening to that and ignoring that or replying and stealing it, whatever floats my boat.
What's that email address again?
workthehands@gmail.com.
Thank you.
And we might end up setting up, I think, maybe just one for the podcast.
Through the years, but it doesn't exist yet. So don't send any emails to it yet.
Yes. We'll set this up quickly before we post the show. But yeah, that'll be it. And
we'll be back pretty soon. We can't promise an exact time, but pretty soon with the Round Robin Challenge, which is ROH's second show. I know that I had a lot of fun doing this, so I'm looking forward to watching the next show soon.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing this too, so I imagine we'll probably come back fairly quickly. This isn't going to be a show where we have probably a set regular schedule. We're kind of going to do it as our schedule and interest permits, but luckily the show's kind of what they call evergreen, where we're not really time sensitive, and as we build a library, you'll just be happy to revisit the hours and hours of
course,
our burgeoning podcast.
And I do, before we go, just want to thank, as always, the Cubs Fan for running thecubsfan.com and posting these shows. And you can go to thecubsfan.com and check out this, my other show, List 'em and Learn, the Justin Shapiro Show, and of course, even though we teased him earlier, the great, our podcast father, Joe Gagne, who gave us our big break in this crazy world. And his the whole archive of Joe versus the World is up there, including me talking about ROH over a decade ago.
Yes. Thanks again. Yeah, we have to thank Cubs a lot for hosting us. We have to thank, and everyone else that really kind of started everyone kind of in our little group down the podcast trail.
All right. Thank you. And again, this has been Through the Years. That's ThROH the Years. And we'll see you soon.
We'll be back.